All right, let's go ahead and call the Senate to order. Sergeant Arms will please secure the chamber doors. Members, please take your seats. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. President?
Looks like it's working. That's always a good sign. All right, Senators, this morning, on the Friday before St. Paddy's Day, we are very pleased to have Pastor Carolyn Schenk of St. Michael's Lutheran Church in Perry Hall, Maryland, guest of the distinguished senator from the 8th District. Please rise for the invocation.
Let us pray. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks for gathering everyone here today and for the various gifts given to each person, especially those who are equipped to serve in the government and specifically for those who serve here in the Maryland Senate. As these elected officials work for the good and benefit of the citizens of Maryland, we ask that you would guide them and their support staff in their work. Speak to them as they deliberate on the topics they are here to discuss today. As they continue throughout this session, sustain them, keep them healthy and focused in their work. Protect them from the dangers of this world so that their work can continue uninterrupted by those who would work to harm them. Comfort them in the midst of difficult decisions. As this week comes to an end, give time for rest and restoration over this weekend in the midst of being out and about with constituents. Amen.
Thank you very much. All right, has everyone recorded their presence? Yes, recognizing, I'm sorry, yes.
Yes,
Recognizing
I
Senator from
thank
District 8,
Pastor
of
Schenk
course.
and would like to journalize the prayer, and I appreciate everything you said, and I'll see you Sunday morning.
Very good, excellent. Without objection, most certainly, we will journalize the
And
remarks this morning.
I'm so happy she's here to see all the goings on about St. Patrick's Day too. So
Well, it's a
she'll
surprise
enjoy that.
event, of course,
Yes.
and we are so thrilled. Before we get to that, let's just make sure that we have everyone. Senator from the 27th. All right, the clerk will take the call. With 46 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland is now in session. And as noted by the Senator from District 8, we are very pleased today to have a special performance on this Friday before St. Patrick's Day. And I would like to invite up the Honorable Timothy R. Ferguson. No relation, but so thrilled that he could be here with us today. And we have a musical interlude to kick off this Friday before Crossover Day. So, I believe we are going to begin with the bagpipes. Is that correct? If the senator, please, from College Park, could please take a seat. Oh, the red button.
Good morning, Senators. All right, special treat for you today. This does not happen in the House, so feel privileged. Pipers, begin your march, please. String Quartet. Oh, Danny boy, the pipes are calling from glen to glen and down the mountainside. The summer's gone and all the roses falling. 'Tis you must go and I must bide. But come ye back when summer's in the meadow. Oh, when the valley's hushed and white with snow. For I'll be here in sunshine or in shadow. Oh, Danny boy, oh, Danny boy, I love you so. And when ye come and all the flowers are dying, and I am dead as dead I will maybe, you'll come and find the place where I am lying, and kneel and say an Ave there for me. For I shall hear, though soft, your tread above me, and on my grave will warmer, sweeter be. For ye shall bend and tell me that you love me, and I shall sleep in peace until you come to me. Mr. President, I want to thank you for bringing us here. We come here every 2 years, and we have some Senate resolutions for some of the musicians.
Absolutely. I believe we're going to have the resolutions prepared. If we could introduce all of the, Senator, if we could introduce the musicians, that'd be.
Certainly will. Some of the folks that you see here today, some of the musicians have been with me from the beginning about 22 years ago. I first did this in 2002. The year that I was unelected, I had no idea it was coming, so it was a great send-off and a great finale. And I want to introduce those two people right now. They're the bagpipers. They've been with me from the very beginning. And that is Mr. Randy Welch, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Michael Binney. The conductor has been with me from the very beginning, Mr. Rowdy Santos. First violinist, Nicholas Curry. The cellist is Nicole Boguslaw. And I have Anna Lupke, the second violinist. So, Mr. President, we're going to have the bagpipers do one more march back to the center back doors, and then we'll turn it back over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Senator may proceed.
Bagpipers. If I could, I want to introduce two people I brought from Senator Michael Jackson's district, if I can use his name. That's my girlfriend, Donna. Nick, take a bow. And Miss Penny Van Dyke from Calvert County. All three of us are from Calvert County now. Oh, my goodness. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to give these out in the lounge. We know you're very busy. You're doing double sessions and all that stuff. And again, I appreciate you always bringing us here to help minister to the senators who work so hard. You deserve a break every now and then, and we're glad to afford you that nice break. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, recognize the Senator from Montgomery County.
Thank you, Mr. President. As the Senate's representatives on the Maryland State Arts Council, I just want to thank Senator Ferguson and President Ferguson for including the arts in our work. When we're stressed, it's so wonderful to have the uplifting joy of music. You've brought the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, and now you've brought these fine and talented people. So thank you for making this day start off with such a happy note, literally.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Senator. And we also had the Morgan State Choir in the Rotunda earlier today, or earlier in session, which was another special experience. We were so thankful for your the musical interlude. Thank you so much to the bagpipers. We appreciate you, and to our string quartet here. Just thank you very much. Beautiful, beautiful. Just top line. It's incredible. So thank you all so much for being here with us. We greatly appreciate you all. All right, with that, we'll let the musicians, you will not disturb us if you're in the midst, so please don't worry. Take your time. Recognize the senator from, a majority leader?
Can I do an introduction, please?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, many of you might have figured out one time that I'm a little bit partial to the universities at Shady Grove. Anyway, today I'm delighted there is a pretty large group from the universities at Shady Grove up in the gallery. Came down here to see how we do things. Talking to each one of them, they're each in kind of a different instructional program. They're just going to do wonderful things, and I'm very, very proud of them. So thank you for being here today, and hope you enjoy your tour around Annapolis.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Great to see you all. Senator from District 8.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think my Parkville High School are up in the gallery. Are the students from Parkville High School? And I appreciate you coming down, and I hope you enjoyed this morning. And we don't have all this excitement every day. We're going to get to work very shortly. But I also would like to say, can I use the senator's name?
Certainly.
Senator Gazzone went to Parkville High, so
That's right.
There he is.
Famous alum right there.
So enjoy your day, and if I can come back to, when you get back to school, maybe one day I'll come and visit you all. So thank you.
Wonderful.
Thanks
Wonderful.
for coming.
Thank you all for being with us. Thank you. Senator from the 27th District.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. We have a Senate resolution for Ms. Penny Van Dyke. If you would come up to the center of the room, please. You and your guests. This resolution is requested for her service at the American Legion Post 206 in Chesapeake Beach. Ms. Penny has served the post for 12 years in many capacities, including president of the Women's Auxiliary for 3 separate terms. She oversees all events that are 4 terms, I'm sorry. All right. She represents all things that are in order there. They run a tight ship there, and they handle all venues thank you. They handle all venues and events at the American Legion. In particular, Mr. President and colleagues, Ms. Penny was instrumental in the celebration and recognition of our Secretary of Veteran Affairs and former State Delegate George Owings. A terrific event, well over 300 plus people in that venue, so we're certainly honored. And in the spirit of the Senate Veterans Caucus and piece of legislation passed earlier this year, we are not only recognizing our veterans, but our families. And so that event, as well as others, is a testament to that. And we're honored to have you here today. And if we could have the resolution read in full. Thank you.
All right, we will have the resolution. The clerk will read the resolution in full.
Be it hereby known to all that the Senate of Maryland offers its sincerest congratulations to Penny Van Dyke in recognition of your service to American Legion Post 206. We commend your dedication to Calvert County veterans and their families. The entire membership extends its best wishes on this memorable occasion and directs this resolution be presented on this 15th day of March 2024.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote? Explain their vote. If not, the clerk will take the call. To Ms. Penny Van Dyke, we thank you and celebrate your work on behalf of veterans across the state of Maryland. Thank you so much for your service. Wonderful. All right. Let's see. Senator from District 18.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the pleasure of introducing the doctor of the day, Dr. Alan Gonzalez Cota. He is a pain management anesthesiologist at Legacy Spine and Wellness in Rockville. I feel like after Monday, I may need to go visit him.
Very good.
Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your service. We appreciate it. All right. Is that any further? Recognized Senator from the 29th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just wanted to have a warm Senate welcome. I just saw my wife and her best friend, lifelong friend, Carol Trivet, walk in. I think they're here in Annapolis for a chick weekend, enjoying
Very good.
the festivities. So.
Excellent. Very good. Well, welcome. Welcome. Thank you for being with us today. And if they want to join us on the floor, please just let us know. We have some seats now, I think. So, all right. Any further introductions? Any further introductions? If not, now might be the appropriate time to the Minority Leader. Some of us may have heard, but would like to recognize the Minority Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It is heartbreaking to make this announcement, but with permission, for those that may not have heard, Senator Mounts' mom passed away last night. Fortunately, it was a very peaceful passing that Johnny and her family were at her side and were able to be with her at the last moments of her life. But I was able to speak to Johnny this morning, and you know, he's certainly very concerned about having missed some time here, but at the same time, he recognizes while he's mourning, he still has a lot of responsibility to make sure that his mom is properly recognized during her passing. You know, she was such an integral part of the community, not just in St. Michael's, but the amount of work that she did in promoting the Eastern Shore all made us very proud to have known her and to have seen what she has done and her love for the shore. But Johnny did want me to pass along that he is very appreciative of everyone's support, and he wanted to make sure that I said that he expresses his love back to everybody else. So again, I would just ask that you keep Johnny and his family in your prayers. Again, for a very difficult time. I also want to thank you, Mr. President. I understand that flowers have already been sent on behalf of the Senate. So we will continue to provide any updates, but again, a very sad time for one of our colleagues, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to inform everyone.
Certainly, and thank you, Senator. And we can potentially adjourn in her honor today, if that would make. Okay. If there's no objections, we'll adjourn in her honor. And believe it was Miss. Actually, I do know her name. She was so. The odd ways of the world works. One of my best friends from college, who lives in Easton, grew up with her, and I just have to read this. It's pretty remarkable. If I'm ever remembered in this way, I think I will feel like I've done something good. Totally eccentric. She owned a bar and ran a junior sailing program. She wore the same outfit every day, a blue dress we referred to as her muumuu. She had two. There was the older, faded version of. Faded version of the other. She drove this electric teal F-250 from the 1990s. Turned out literally dozens of college sailors, national champions, and a handful of Olympians. She also ran this shuttle from her bar, which would take anyone home anywhere in the county, which it's pretty, sort of runs the gambit. So she was clearly a special woman, So excellent. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. All right. Anything else before we jump in today? On to the work. Yes, Senator from District 9.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm not sure which gallery, but I have about a dozen constituents here from District 9 for District 9 Day. If they could stand and be recognized.
I think behind us. Yes, welcome from the residents from District 9.
So we wish you a warm Senate welcome, and I wanted to give a shout out to my new legislative director, Bridget O'Toole, who's here with her family, and she's just done an amazing job for her first year in the Senate.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Welcome, welcome. All right, let's go ahead and jump in. We've got a fair amount of work today. This will be our first of two sessions today. We'll see what time. We'll see how it goes, and if we can get through our work, our goal is to get out of here not too late this evening. Not too late. We'll see how far we can get. So, let's start on a bill that is no surprise, or so be considered the reading of the journal from the prior legislative day. The first order of business is a friendly bill that we've seen a bit. Layover calendar number 35. Clerk, read the bill.
Senate Bill 429, Senator Bailey, Corporations and Associations, Protestant Episcopal Church, Diocese of Washington. Question is on the adoption of the two amendments offered from the floor by Senator Muse.
All right, so we have the amendments from before. Do we want to hear from the maker of those amendments first? Recognizing the maker of the amendments?
Thank you very much. Because I presented it last night, I won't go over that. I'll simply say what this amendment does.
Senator, before we do that, on the current amendment that's on the bill, does the senator wish to withdraw that amendment?
Yes.
Okay, the senator has withdrawn the prior amendment. The bill is now before us on second reader, open to amendment, and the senator has a revised amendment, which the pages have collected and are distributing. And once we get it up here on the board, all right, Senator may explain the amendment.
This is just a study. It's a study looking at whether or not we want to continue to codify what has kept the property of local congregations in the hands of the denomination. They have now split three different ways, and some want to stay, some want to go, and to lose their buildings and have their buildings sold out from under them, or to be told that you can purchase your building, but we've got a hold on all of your finances. It just seems something to be imbalanced there. So we want to bring everyone together so we can look at what we can introduce relative to this statute that went into law in 1968 and really should not have been there. That's what this does.
All right, Senator has moved the amendment. On the floor, Leader.
Thank you, President. This amendment now refers to the correct sections of the Corporations and Associations article, and with that change, it's regarded as a friendly amendment.
All right. Any objections from the floor? Without objection, the amendment is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 429 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. All right, let's go ahead and get through some second readers here and go to the Committee on Finance. This is report number 29. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 516, Senator A. Washington, Economic Development, Maryland Aerospace and Technology Commission, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsor is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, Senate Bill 516 establishes the Maryland Aerospace and Technology Commission within the Department of Commerce to promote innovation in the fields of space exploration and commercial aerospace opportunities in the state. There are amendments. Amendment number 1 makes changes to the purpose and function paragraphs. Amendment number 2 alters the membership of the commission. And I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leaders move for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. Just a quick aside, I had a chance, and the senator and I spoke about this, of visiting Wallops Island, the NASA facility there. It's pretty remarkable. And so actually Maryland isn't quite primed to be an aerospace leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. And also, I would just say NASA is here in Maryland, is in Prince George's County, and is in District 22. So very happy that this bill is moving along, and we need to make sure that aerospace is recognized here in the state of Maryland. We have the most aerospace engineers in the country here in Maryland.
Absolutely. People don't know that. Thank you, Senator. All right, on the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 516 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 594, Senator Hershey, Maryland Medical Assistance Program coverage for the treatment of obesity, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the bill sponsor is the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. As amended, Senate Bill 594 requires the Department of Health, in consultation with relevant stakeholders, to study the impact of requiring the Maryland Medical Assistance Program, or Medicaid, to provide comprehensive coverage for the treatment of obesity and report its findings by December 31st, 2024. Amendment number 1 alters the title, purpose, and function paragraphs. Amendment 2 strikes the bill as introduced and substitutes the required study as described. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 594 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 751, Senator Klossmeyer, Public Health Opioid Restitution Advisory Council and Fund revisions, favorable with 1 amendment.
Recognizing the bill sponsor is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the Senate. As amended, Senate Bill 751 requires the Secretary of Health, within 6 months of receiving specified findings and recommendations from the Opioid Restitution Fund Advisory Council, to present to the Advisory Council decisions for allocations from the Opioid Restitution Fund. The Department of Health must post to the department's website the council's findings and recommendations and the secretary's decisions. The bill expands the permitted use of the fund to include supporting community-based nonprofit recovery organizations that provide non-clinical substance use recovery support services. Amendment number 1 alters the timing of the Secretary's presentation of the decisions to the Council and clarifies the community-based organizations supported by the fund as described. The amendment also strikes provisions requiring a certain percentage of the funds to be used to support community-based organization and strikes an annual report. Finally, the amendment requires the department by December 1st, 2024 to report on the best process for making expenditures from the fund accessible to the public. There is no fiscal impact, and I move the amendment and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 1 committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 1 committee amendment is adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objection? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 751 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 790, Senator Klossmeyer, Maryland Medical Assistance Program, Employed Individual with Disabilities, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsor is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, Senate Bill 790 alters requirements for the Medicaid Employed Persons with Disabilities, or EID, program, largely codifying current practice. Among other provisions, the bill requires the Department of Health to provide EID services to qualified individuals as young as 16 and establish premium contribution requirements for EID program services. The department is prohibited from limiting eligibility based on specific income, asset, or Social Security disability insurance benefits as statutes. The department is also required to meet with specified advocates at certain intervals and apply to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services for any necessary alterations to the state plan. Amendment number 1 adds a sponsor. Amendment number 2 strikes provisions related to transitioning between EID and Medicaid services, establishing specific premium contributions, and prohibiting the department from establishing an upper age limit. I move the amendment and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 790 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 843, Senator Klossmeyer, Workers' Compensation Benefits Hearing Loss, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsor for the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, Senate Bill 843 modifies the way occupational deafness and hearing loss must be calculated and determined for purposes of workers' compensation benefits by 1, increasing the number of frequencies that must be included in the calculations, and number 2, altering how age-related non-occupational deafness is calculated. Amendment number 1 makes changes to the purpose and the function paragraphs. And amendment number 2, applying the same frequencies to provisions specific to hearing loss due to industrial noise, and strike from the bill provisions related to tinnitus. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 843 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 896, Senator Carter, Baltimore Convention and Tourism Redevelopment Operating Authority Task Force, favorable with 1 amendment.
Recognizing the senator from District 40 is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, Senate Bill 896 establishes the Baltimore Convention and Tourism Redevelopment Operating Authority Task Force to study the establishment of an entity of strategy to govern redevelopment, revitalize, construct, design, manage, finance, and operate certain state and local real property assets while promoting the Baltimore Convention site and the immediate surrounding area. The Department of Commerce must provide staff for the task force. Amendment number 1 adds members to the task force, alters the scope of the study, and requires the task force to consider and make recommendations of at least 1 option that does not include a public-private partnership or the status quo. I move the amendments and the adoption of a favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 1 committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objection? Without objection, the 1 committee amendment is adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objection? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 896 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Let's go to the next finance calendar. This is calendar 30. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 59, Senator Ellis, Safe Sleep for Infants Awareness and Certification, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the bill sponsor is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill, Senate Bill 59, takes a huge step forward in lowering the infant mortality in Maryland. I'm not sure if you've heard that a lot of babies die because of unsafe sleep practices. So this bill, Senate Bill 59, as amended, requires a hospital to inform, to educate parents or guardians on discharge on safe sleep practices for their babies. Practices such as not sleeping in a supine position, sleeping on a firm, flat sleep surface, avoiding soft bedding and overheating, and no exposure to smoke. The bill has 2 amendments, add sponsors and alter the bill as just described. Mr. President, I move the amendments and adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 59 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 84, Senator Rosapep, Teacher Degree Apprenticeship, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the senator from District 19 is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Senate Bill 84 establishes the Teacher Apprenticeship Startup Grant Program in order to provide opportunities to begin a career in education in the state to high school students, college students, and career changers. Develop a cohort of individuals qualified to work as teachers in the state, and encourage local boards of education to hire apprentices. The Maryland Department of Labor may award up to $500,000 to a sponsor for development and launch of a teacher apprenticeship program. There were 2 amendments. They are technical, and Mr. President, I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 84 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 511, Senator A. Washington, Labor and Employment Apprenticeship Standards, Ratio of Apprenticeship to Journey Persons, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the bill sponsors, the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill, as amended, requires the Maryland Department of Labor to study non-traditional apprenticeships in the state with a focus on mentorship ratios and occupations that could benefit from involvement in with apprenticeships. There are 2 amendments which alters the bill. It completely strikes the bill and creates it into a study instead. I move the adoption of the committee report and the amendments. Thank you.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 511 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 651, Senator Kagan, Business Regulations, Sale of Motor Fuel Pricing, Signage, Gas Price Gouging Act, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the chair of the committee is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 651 requires the sign at a gas station must reveal the cash price and the credit debit price. So it needs to be very obvious that people know if they're doing credit or debit that they're paying more money than cash. It's a mostly antiquated exception from the existing signage requirement for retail service station dealers who operate with up to 3 dispensing units and 6 combined nozzles, so it'll apply to all gas stations. Amendment 1 alters the title and is technical. Amendment 2 preempts local governments from passing similar requirements and requires uniform numeral sizes. I move the amendment and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
All right. Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, was a quick jump from the senator from District 7.
Sorry, I pulled a cord here, you know. All excited.
Yes.
I was on finance. We had this bill for how many years? A lot. Can I ask, if you don't mind, real quick?
Appears once the senator moves.
I know. You know, I've been with B&T. My math gets better. Bills we held in finance fly out. Amazing times.
It didn't fly out, I can assure you.
It's like a cicada. It stayed there for like 17 years before it finally worked its way out. In all seriousness, so I remember the senator, you know, the issue was you go to a gas station and you see the sign that says, let's say, $3.25. When you go to the pump, most of us pay with credit cards, and you realize it's like $3.35. It's like, wait, what's the issue? Well, that was the cash price. You paid the credit price. Do we still deal with that in this bill?
they will have to advertise both the cash price and the credit price in the same size numerals. So it needs to be obvious to the consumer that what price they'll pay for cash and what price they'll pay for credit.
So how does this impact a station where most of them have the new electronic signs that have 3 prices, which is, I guess, what, I'm trying to think of how the,
There's cash credits and
Supreme, the three levels of gas.
Yeah.
Are they now going to have 6 spaces for cash and credit?
No, they just need to advertise the highest price if they don't want to.
Oh, the high, okay.
Yeah, they have to show the highest price. And then if they want to show the cash price, they can. You know, some have loyalty discounts and car wash discounts and all those things, but the highest price does need to be one of the prices advertised.
Okay. Mr. President, are we going to have a second session?
We are.
Okay, I don't want to hold this up, but would you mind if we just lay it over so I can at least look at it?
Thank you. Can I also mention, though, this year that the gas station dealers came in and support for the first time.
Wow, first
Yeah,
time.
First time.
Man, you worked them over. All right.
All right, the senator's motion is in
yeah, well,
order.
I guess, Mr. President, you don't mind, can I ask why the change of heart from them? I mean,
I think because they can still advertise the credit price, but they just have to make sure they advertise the cash price. And there's some help with the signage. If they can't afford to do the signage, the gas supplier, the petroleum supplier, will do the signage.
okay, I'm just confused on one thing, and I don't know if you or the sponsor, I thought all they had to do was, from your earlier explanations, just advertise the highest price.
Yes, they have to advertise. They can advertise all their prices, but they have to include the highest price as one of the.
So if they only advertise one price,
If they only want to advertise one price, it has to be the highest.
it has to be the highest price, but they can still offer a cash price
Yes.
at a lower fee.
They can.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
Just
The minority, to the minority leader?
Yeah, if I could just add something as well too, and we were just talking, the chair was answering the questions. What else is new? It also has preemption language in it this year as well too. So what had happened previously, is, like you said, it's been before us for many, many years. What we started seeing was each of the counties, and I think Baltimore City as well too, started passing their own regulations. And so this bill now has preemption language that our requirements now take place, and that's what brought the convenience stores and the service stations in favor of the bill, because they didn't want a hodgepodge of different regulations across the state.
Makes sense. Yep. All right, excellent. Do we want to assume the senator withdrew the motion or did not withdraw the motion? Okay, so the senator's motion is in order. The bill and the amendments will lie over under the rule. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 723, Senator Benson, baby food toxic heavy metals testing and labeling, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the vice chair of the committee is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 723, as amended, requires each manufacturer of baby food beginning January 1st, 2025, to test a representative sample of the final product for each toxic heavy metal. Testing must be conducted by a proficient laboratory at least once per month. Beginning January 1st, 2026, each manufacturer of baby food must make specified information publicly available on their website and the baby food product label. Amendment number 1 alters the title and is technical. Amendment number 2 adds definitions, prohibits a person from selling, distributing, or offering for sale baby food in the state that contains toxic heavy metals that exceed limits established by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, requires a manufacturer to conduct certain testing and include certain information on the product labels, and requires consumers to make certain reports to the Maryland Department of Health. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. There's a horrible issue with the applesauce, and the lead was terrible. All right, on the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 723 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 910, Senator Rosa Pep, Governor's Workforce Development Board, Study on Diploma and Degree Employment Discrimination, favorable with 3 amendments.
The senator from 22nd District is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill requires the Governor's Workforce Development Board to conduct a study on approaches to advancing skills-driven education and training, hiring, and internal advancement practices across public and private sector employers. Amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 is clarifying and adds additional data to be collected. Amendment number 3 it makes the bill contingent on funding in the budget, so the funding was removed from this bill. I move the adoption of the favorable committee report and amendments.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 3 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 3 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 910 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 952, Senator Hedelman, Assisted Living Programs, Assisted Living Referrers, Requirements, and Prohibitions, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the chair of the committee is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are these companies that do referrals for you. If you have a loved one that needs to go to a nursing home or rehab or assisted living, there are these companies that will do referrals for you, and that's what this bill's about. So this bill, Senate Bill 952, establishes additional requirements that apply to assisted living referrers. An assisted living referrer must maintain general liability insurance, require employees to obtain a criminal history records check, sign a Federal Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act agreement with the client or the client's representative, and maintain a signed, written, and dated document between the assisted living referrer and the client or the client's representative outlining the terms of the assistance. Amendment 1 is technical. Amendment 2 alters and applies the HIPAA language to current practice, and if medical records are exchanged, specifies that certain agreements may be electronic, extends a request for payment to 2 years, strikes language regarding tours, prohibits a referral from selling data, and alters requirements for a user-friendly database. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objection? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 952 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. All right, let's clear out finance. This is report number 31. Clerk, read the first bill.
Senate Bill 614, Senator Beidel, Maryland Medical Assistance Program and Health Insurance Coverage for Orthosis and Prothesis. Favorable with 3 amendments.
All right, I believe we have this. Recognizing the chair of the committee is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have just a few files on my desk.
Rocking and rolling in finance. Things are moving.
Senate Bill 614 adds, oh, that's wrong. That's in the wrong bill. Senate Bill 614 provides, expands the current health insurance mandated benefit for coverage of prosthetic devices to be covered for prosthesis and replacement for prosthesis. The bill also requires Medicaid to provide coverage for prosthesis as specified under the bill. Among other requirements, the covered benefits mandated under the bill include prosthesis determined by a treating healthcare provider to be medically necessary for completing activities of daily living, essential job-related activities, or performing physical activities such as running and other activities. Amendment 1 makes changes to the title of the bill and adds sponsors. I think the entire committee is now a sponsor. Amendment 2 strikes from the bill provisions that would have required coverage for orthosis and replaces the replacement of orthosis. The amendment also, among other changes, limits the required coverage for prosthesis to once annually, alters coverage requirements for replacements, and specifies that covered benefits may not be subject to higher cost-sharing requirements than those for other similar medical and surgical benefits. Amendment 3 specifies legislative intent relating to Medicare coverage of certain L codes for prosthetic procedures and devices and requires an evaluation of the cost impact for requiring coverage. I move the amendment and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 3 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 3 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 614 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 697, Senator Guile, Maryland National Guard TRICARE Premium Reimbursement Program alterations, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsors, the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 697 repeals the $60 monthly cap on a grant award that the military department may provide to an eligible recipient under the TRICARE Premium Reimbursement Program. Amendment 1 adds sponsors and makes a change to the purpose paragraph. Amendment 2 specifies that the total amount of grants awarded to eligible recipients in a fiscal year may not exceed the annual appropriation in the state budget for the TRICARE Premium Reimbursement Program. I move the amendments and adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. Let's hear from the senator from District 7.
Thank you. With the floor leader, you for a quick question.
Senator, may
Yes.
proceed.
Thanks. So in my unit, they actually brought this up a couple times. People have been talking about it. So I thought there was a $60 cap. That way it went to everybody.
Right.
By removing this now, can only a couple, if they burn through the money, does it make it not available to everybody else once you hit the max?
No, so what this would do is, like, for example, if your premium is higher because you have a family, for example, then your premium is going to be more. Then you can actually be able to get a grant for that full amount of the premium, but you just can't, ultimately, they can limit it to whatever's allocated within the budget for it. So there wouldn't be any increased spending. It wouldn't say that anybody, like, wouldn't deny access to anybody else. I hope that answered your question.
Still a little foggy, but I'll read it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, on the amendments, any further discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 697 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 891, Senator McCray, Transportation Mobility Link Paratransit Services Improvements Study, favorable with 1 amendment.
Recognized senator from the 40th District is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 891 requires in the Maryland Transportation Institute at the University of Maryland to conduct a study to identify methods to improve the Maryland Transit Administration's Americans with Disabilities Act Mobility Link Paratransit Service. The amendment requires the study to solicit certain input and comments from the Maryland Commission on Disabilities and the State Coordinating Committee on Human Services Transportation. The amendment also requires the study to develop recommendations of certain matters and requires submission of a report to the Maryland Department of Transportation. I move the amendment and the adoption of a favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 1 committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 1 committee amendment is adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 891 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Let's go to Education, Energy, and the Environment. Start with report number 30. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 691, Senator Augustine, Higher Education Firefighters and EMS Recruitment and Retention Scholarship and Loan Repayment Assistance, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the bill sponsor is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, this bill expands the eligibility requirements for the Charles W. Riley Firefighter and Ambulance Rescue Squad Member Scholarship and alters the maximum award amount that may be issued to students studying at either 2 or 4-year public institutions of higher education. Initial awards must be provided to scholarship recipients on a first-come, first-served basis. Further, any student financial aid other than a student loan must be credited to the recipient's tuition before the calculation of any award amount provided through the scholarship. There are 2 committee amendments. Amendment 1 is technical. Amendment 2 strikes the provisions of the bill establishing a new loan repayment assistance program and the 2 evaluations of the Department of Budget and Management. There is no fiscal impact. I move adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 691 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 978, Senator Hester, Election Law, Synthetic Media Disclosures and Regulations, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsor is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, this is another artificial intelligence bill. You may have noticed that campaign material may now be generated using artificial intelligence, and there may be a video that never actually happened in reality. And so what Senate Bill 978 does is it requires specified persons who are regulated by the State Board of Elections that publish, distribute, or disseminate synthetic media to publish the original content on their website and to establish specified disclosures on whether the synthetic media is a still image, audio recording, or video recording. There are two amendments, colleagues. The first is technical. The second narrows the applicability of the bill to candidates, campaign finance entities, and persons required to register because they make independent expenditures or electioneering. It strikes the definition of a news media entity, it strikes the harm to reputation, and it changes the effective date from June 1 from an emergency bill. I would like to move adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 978 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 1035, Senator Rosapep, focusing Federal Career and Technical Education Acts Fund on Blueprint School to Work Apprenticeships Goals Act. Favorable is two amendments.
Recognizing the senator from the 38th District as floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 1035 focuses the Federal Career and Technical Education Act funds on the Blueprint School to Work Apprenticeship Goals Act. And this bill requires that the State Board of Education to collaborate with the Career and Technical Education Committee to develop a 4-year plan for CTE, Career Technical Education in the state, including submitting its 4-year plan for the administration of the federal Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act of 2006 to the CTE Committee for approval. This bill also designates the Maryland State Department of Education as the sole state agency responsible for the implementation of the Perkins funds. Beginning in fiscal 2025, the CTE Committee must review the Maryland Department of Education's proposed use of the Perkins funds to ensure consistency with the blueprint for Maryland's future blueprint as specified. The bill expands the duties of the CTE Committee to include allocating the funds received from Perkins. Colleagues, there are two amendments. Amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 requires the State Board of Education and the CTE Committee to work collaboratively on the 4-year state plan for CTE and ensure programmatic and fiscal alignment with the Federal Perkins Act and the blueprint. Good process work there. MSDE and the State Board are retained as administrator of the funds received under the Perkins grant. It's consistent with federal law. The CTE Committee must review MSDE's allocation of the funds to ensure that the Perkins grant funds are consistent with the blueprint, and the governor is required to resolve any disagreement or disputes arising out of or in connection with the joint approval of the state plan. And colleagues, as a member of the Apprenticeship Commission, this bill, SB 1035, I believe will keep us on track on meeting our apprenticeship goals and our school to work goals. So with that, there's no fiscal impact. I move for a favorable report with the amendments I move for the amendments, SB 1035 to be moved, and then for SB 1035 with the amendments to be moved.
All right, floor leader moves for the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 1035 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 1102, the President Education Blueprint for Maryland's Future, alterations favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the senator from the 43rd District as floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 1002, the Blueprint for Maryland's Future alterations, makes alterations to the education article related to the implementation of the blueprint. It provides for the expansion of 30 additional Patty and Judy Family Support Centers. It clarifies that our Family Support Center funds may be used for the planning and development in their first year. It includes that funding can be used to help improve for educators who are looking to increase their credentials to be consistent with the blueprint, for this subsidy to be provided for non-classroom teachers. Additionally, after the due date that's currently in statute, we have altered that due date for the Career, Technical, and Education Committee from December 1st, 2022 to June 2024. So we're giving them an additional 2 years. We've also authorized local governments of health and social services to share their contacts with each other in order to facilitate the support of the programs. We clarify that the 2003 changes to our high-quality pre-K staffing also applies to the staffing for, our pre-K also qualifies for the pre-K expansion grant. So we were funding the expansion of pre-K staffing, but we also had a separate pre-K expansion grant. So I want to clarify that both of those have to abide by these policies. We are enabling early childhood educators to receive their grants under the Nancy Grassmith Public School Professional Awards, and we're also clarifying that non-classroom teachers may also receive subsidies to support their acquiring national certification as required under the blueprint. We're also providing the AIB board with additional time to provide their report and recommendations that were originally required in 2006, allowing them to provide that in 2007. There are 2 committee amendments. The first committee amendment is technical. The second committee amendment provides for all students who meet college and career readiness standards with access to the following post-college and career readiness pathways at no cost. That we're making sure that their participation in dual enrollment will not result in any increased costs for their parents. We're also expanding the qualifications of who can participate in these programs, and we're also requiring that the state board develop regulations to implement these changes that guarantee, to the extent practicable, that there is statewide uniformity in the quality of our pathways. We require high school graduation credit to be awarded for any program that is administered, and also that the administration of the kindergarten readiness assessment will apply to all kindergartners, and that completed after October 10th. Also, we're ensuring that the results will be made available for the public to view, and also that the date shall take effect June 2024. The committee vote was unanimous. I ask for your adoption of the committee amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Chair recognizes the minority leader on the amendments.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The floor leader would yield, please.
Senator may proceed.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of things. You mentioned pre-K staffing and funding for that. Could you just specifically go over again what changes are being made for pre-K? I know that that has been a issue with a lot of school systems and being able to try to find locations for pre-K that they cannot have the physical structures to bring these children into.
Yeah.
They've tried to go out to the private sector to see if they could accommodate this and have struggled there as well too. So just how does this bill and the amendments address pre-K?
Okay, so the pre-K, one part is directing that the state board set standards, and that first it's standards for the administration of the kindergarten readiness assessment. And I just want to make sure you got that. The second one has to do with, hold on. Okay, yes, it's clarifying that the changes to the high-quality pre-K staffing, moving the requirements to the 2027-28 school year. So essentially, we're giving additional time to get the expansion. It's a big bill. I apologize for not saying that in the beginning, but yes, that is.
No worry, and that was important. I think I had a bill.
So there's no additional requirements. We're just giving more time to achieve it.
That's a good thing, and I'm going to. I think I had a bill in committee that dealt a little bit with that. I had some other issues in my bill, but I do want to take a look at that as well. You also mentioned the AIB several times, and what, again, where there's some. I think you said a delay in a report from 2006. Do you mean 2026 to 2000?
Yeah, so originally the AIB was to provide an interim blueprint program evaluation and set goals, et cetera, and that was due by 2026. So now in this legislation, the AIB has requested that it be extended a year to January 2027.
So what does that do for the overall blueprint? You know, again, I think a number of us have been talking about trying to delay the implementation of the blueprint because obviously there are huge fiscal concerns with respect to the blueprint, not only at the state level, but at the county levels as well with their school boards. So the delay in the report for the AIB, does that extend to delaying the entire blueprint, or is it just specifically a report?
No, there's no delay in our commitment as a legislature and as Maryland to the goals in the blueprint. However, this year, the AIB board itself was not funded in the governor's budget for this particular aspect of their responsibility in the blueprint.
Okay, so because there is no funding, we are delaying the requirement of the report?
Oh, there we go. Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, right. Thank you. I was just reminded I have to go back in time. So the original implementation was delayed because the governor at that time vetoed funding for the entire program. And so now this administration, we've got a new governor and new funding opportunities. So there are many things that the committee are going through and looking that we have to make adjustments for because of the lack of funding under the prior administration.
Okay, but it still delays the report from 2026 to 2027.
Right, because you can't report on anything that, Mr. President, that was not implemented due to not being able to start the program because of veto.
Right. And I think you're right. I mean, there was obviously a number of concerns when this bill was originally passed in the previous administration. The governor did veto it. And mainly, I think a lot of us were concerned about the overall funding of it. And I guess we're going to be addressing that issue in the next couple sessions that we're down here, and how do we fund this massive mandate. And the counties are trying to struggle with this as well, too. And this might not be specific to this bill, but being on the committee you're at, and something I've heard about, and does this tie in at all? Was there a bill that talked about more specific language to the budgeting process that the boards of education local boards of education are providing to their counties?
No, not in this bill.
Not in this bill, but there is a bill that was. Are you familiar with the bill that was out there that did that at all, or not?
There are many bills.
Okay, that's okay. If you don't, that's fine. Okay, I appreciate your responses, and
thank you.
If there's no other questions, Mr. President, can the bill and the amendments lie over under the rule?
All right, Senator's motion is in order. The bill and the amendments will lie over under the rule. Let's go to 31. Clerk, read the first bill.
Senate Bill 532, Senator Gallion, Commission to Advance Lithium-Ion Battery Safety in Maryland, favorable with one amendment.
Recognizing Senator, bill sponsors the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Lithium-ion batteries are becoming more and more prevalent. I know at home I have a chainsaw that runs on this. I have a weed eater. And as we go towards more electric vehicles, you're going to see more and more of these. So what this bill quite simply does is establish a commission to advance lithium-ion battery safety in Maryland. The Office of the State Fire Marshal must provide staff for the commission, and by December 1st, 2025, the commission must report its findings and recommendations to the governor and to the General Assembly. There is one committee amendment. The amendment modifies the membership and scope of the commission and requires an interim report and authorizes the commission to seek advice and consultation from outside individuals and entities. I'd like to move the amendment and for adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 532 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 854, Washington County Senators, Agricultural Nuisance Insects, favorable.
Recognizing the senator from the 35th District as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill requires, rather than authorizes, the Secretary of Agriculture to implement a program to use Bacillus thuringiensis israelensis, otherwise known as BTI, to control or eliminate nuisance insects in the state accordance with the state budget and subject to specified existing notice requirements. The bill further requires, rather than authorizes, the Secretary to carry out a project under the program if the county or municipality in which the nuisance insects are located agrees to pay 50% of the costs associated with the project. This bill would take effect July 1st, 2024. There are no committee amendments. I'd like to ask for adoption of the favorable committee report.
All right, floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. On the report, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any further amendments or any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 854 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 902, Senator Lewis Young, Wildlife Protections and Highway Crossings, favorable with two amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsor is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, in Maryland, there are 33,000 animal vehicle collisions a year. The average cost per claim is $6,000. So doing the math, that's about $198 million in insurance claims per year. In addition to that, there are other costs, such as accident attendance, towing, investigations, carcass disposal. That's roughly $260 per incident, or $8.5 million a year. There is a study from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety that found Frederick County numbers number 6 in the nation for these vehicle accidents with animals, and Howard County ranks 10th nationwide. Clearly, we need some corrective action. We have examples of where highway crossings, which is the intent of this bill, has worked elsewhere in the country. For example, in Colorado, highway crossings and other mitigations have reduced animal-related vehicle accidents by 90%. There is federal funding for this. The Federal Highway Administration's Wildlife Crossings Pilot Program has approximately $110 million. Virginia received $604,000, Pennsylvania $840,000, Vermont $1.62, Maryland $0 because we haven't applied. So what this bill does is put a process in place so that we can benefit from some of that federal money. It authorizes the State Highway Administration to work collaboratively with DNR to develop guidelines for bridges, culverts, roads, and retrofitting existing culverts or tunnels, which is clearly less expensive. It also identifies, this bill would require identification of those sites that are the most problematic so that resources can be directed to where the actual accidents are occurring. So this bill has been heavily amended, and the amendments really clear out any kind of a fiscal note, and the amendments also remove specific infrastructure requirements and leaves decisions up to SHA discretion and extends the date. So I move for a favorable adoption of the two committee amendments as well as the favorable committee report.
Floor Leader moves for adoption of the two committee amendments, the favorable committee report. Chair recognizes the senator from the 29th District on the amendments.
Thank you. If I could ask the floor leader some questions.
Will the floor leader yield?
Certainly.
Senator may proceed.
If you could repeat the number of vehicle accidents with animals?
Just for Maryland, 33,000 per year.
And was that the amount with, that would be a registered vehicle, because does that involve a claim?
I'm assuming so, because we also have the numbers of how much per claim. But I can look how else would we know?
Okay, so the fact is, the average claim, I think you said, was $6,000?
$6,000 plus there are other incidental expenses to send somebody out, to remove the carcass, to take reports, whatever.
If I understand the bill, it adds a fee to each registered vehicle for $10?
No. That was amended out. One of the insurance companies objected to that. Actually, it was State Farm. They loved the bill. They loved the concept because it will save them a lot of money, but they didn't want to add a fee on. So what we're looking to do now is obviously tap into that federal money that we're leaving on the table, but also insert some options. For example, on the DNR website, have an optional donation. Also have an option when you renew your driver's license. So since the amount of revenue is unpredictable, the bill is heavily amended to say subject to funding. And as I mentioned, depending upon the funding level, there would be a prioritization of how heavily we could go into building overpasses or underpasses versus just minor corrective retrofitting efforts.
Thank you. Not to belabor the point, I'd ask that the bill lay over under the rule. Possible amendment. Thank
The motion is in order. The bill and the amendment will lay over under the rule. We'll take it up later this afternoon. All right, clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 1068, Senator Kagan, Human Services 211 and 311 Systems, Non-Emergency Information and Referrals, favorable with two amendments.
Recognize the bill sponsors the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, this bill has been on quite a journey. It started with the 911 Commission and the discovery that enormous percentages of calls into our 911 centers are not emergencies. And since they are underfunded, that's a problem. And that means, and I've had some of you come up to me and say that a constituent had just contacted you because she was put on hold or got voicemail or heard music. So the question is, how can we provide our constituents the help that they need? And the answer, we believe, is a statewide 311 system. Right now, 6 counties have a 311 system, and they're doing great, but there will be money saved if we use artificial intelligence and if we use a statewide system. So we've been toying around with where it should be living and what it's going to cost and how much of it could be synchronous, you know, live person answering your call versus asynchronous. We have come up with this amended language, which, and I want to thank our friends at Do It, Secretary Savage and the Department of Information Technology, because they are delighted about this idea. And so they're going to take some time to continue the work that the good senator from District 9 has begun on artificial intelligence and make sure that it is going to work appropriately, and they're going to then, as amended, prioritize the creation of a statewide 311 portal. It can answer small questions, where can I early vote, or what time does the library close, or bigger questions like my unemployment check hasn't come, and other constituent matters that we deal with every day and that the governor's office gets confronted with all the time. So there are 2 committee amendments. The first is technical. The second is as I described. I move for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 1068 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill. Is that actually the last one? Nope, one more. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 1074, Senator Reedy, Environment Industrial Sludge Utilization Permit Establishment, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the senator from the 35th District as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill, as drafted, establishes a regulatory program in the Department of Environment related to the utilization of industrial sludge that includes the establishment of an industrial sludge permit. There are 2 committee amendments. The amendments instead establish a food processing residuals utilization permit issued by the Department of Agriculture, which authorizes the holder to utilize food processing residuals in conjunction with an agricultural operation. The amendment establishes requirements for utilizing the permit, application requirements, notice requirements on the part of the Department of Agriculture, requirements to maintain a permit in good standing, information requirements, right of entry for the department, and penalty provisions. The bill also establishes the Food Processing Residuals and Administration Fund. The amendment requires the department, in consultation with MDE, to adopt certain regulations. Finally, the amendment authorizes MDA to administer a commercial hauler certification program. There was unanimous support in the committee. I'd like to move the 2 committee amendments and ask for a favorable adoption of the committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 1074 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Last one for Triple E, Report 32. Clerk, read the bill.
Senate Bill 620, Senator Carter, Resources and Education for All Prisoners, REAP Act, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the senator from the 43rd District as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 620, the REAP Act. This bill requires that the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services assist incarcerated individuals in applying for and taking advantage of federal Pell Grants for education in cooperation with our academic institutions. There are, at our academic institutions, there are a number that provide opportunities, these types of opportunities. It also requires, the bill draws upon evidence that education can play a large role in the reform, rehabilitation, and successful reentry into civil society. There are 2 committee amendments. One is technical. The second committee amendment strikes the Department of Labor from the bill and only requires that the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services assists incarcerated individuals. Two, requires the department to consult with specific institutions of higher education, including all University of Maryland systems. There is a lot of participation with some of our privates, but the committee and the bill sponsors believe that more of our state institutions can participate as well. It makes provisions for the bills to apply to all post-secondary education programs. Instead of just education programs in general, we want to ensure that these are programs that result in certification or in advanced degrees. And finally, instead of authorizing MHEC to assist, it requires, instead of authorizing MHEC to assist in this process. I move for the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. We'll hear from the senator from College Park on the amendments.
Thank you. I've just got a question. If the floor leader will yield for a question.
Senator may proceed.
You mentioned that the Labor Department was struck from something. I'm curious what it was struck from and why it was struck.
So the Labor Department was struck from originally being, let me just check 1 second. Oh, in the bill as drafted, it would have required the Department of Labor to play a more active role in the provision of the educational services. The committee believes that they do play an active role, so instead it's requiring the Department of Corrections to play a more important role.
If I could follow up, what does that mean? I mean, basically, the Labor Department is responsible for education in the prisons. It's responsible.
That is correct. Yeah. So Mr. President, the committee believes, and it's my understanding, that there can be better cooperation and education between Dollar and corrections. So that's so it's reaffirming in the law that the Department of Corrections plays a role in this process.
Putting in my own words, basically wanting the Department of Corrections to be more cooperative and helpful to the Department of Labor in providing the education and training services?
We're going to find out about that, if you could.
Thank you.
Well, do you have another question while
Nope,
we
that's it.
get
No,
that
that's okay.
out?
When you can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's hear from the Minority Whip on the amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. We were secondary. The Senate Finance Committee was secondary on this. I voted against the bill largely because I was not sure about a couple of things, and I wonder if I could ask the floor leader a question or two.
Will the floor leader yield for a question? Appears so. Senator may proceed.
Because we're certainly very supportive of prison education efforts, and we actually had a bill we passed through this year, also sponsored, I believe, by the same senator, trying to look at the overall education system in our corrections and make sure we're doing the best job that we can. The one concern I had was Pell Grants. It's federal, of course. There's no state fiscal note on this, correct? Okay.
No.
Are Pell Grants competitive in the sense that only a state or a region or an area only gets so much of those, so many of those?
No.
So it's a, go ahead, sorry. Please.
I was anticipating your question, and I shouldn't do that.
Okay.
Continue.
So, Mr. President, we don't need to worry that we're freezing anybody else out of getting an opportunity. How do you qualify for it?
There's not simply a Maryland pie of Pell Grants and we're adding more people to the pie so that the slices get thinner. No, that's not what's happening.
And if Pell Grants are available for all post-secondary education?
The Pell Grants are available for all persons, and one of the challenges is that many incarcerated and formerly incarcerated persons are eligible. However, they're not provided with the information or the support to apply, so that, frankly, our universities, if they're participating in these programs, can be reimbursed, the tuition can be paid. So it's using Pell Grant money.
Right. So this bill, what is this? This bill provides almost like helps with navigators in a sense, or?
Yes.
Okay, so that, but it's not going to cost. It's not going to cost
The
our
fiscal writer said it's minimal.
minimal. It's just staff. at the
Yes.
time. I guess, Mike, I'm curious why that wasn't something that was why that. Sometimes I wonder why we necessarily need a bill on something. And I'm not picking on this bill. I'm not saying we maybe do, but is it just to be sure it's clear? Is this bill just to make it clear that this is something we want them to engage in? Is that why we're doing the bill? Oh.
Yeah, so it's setting
Okay.
goals and it's bringing attention to it, and that's the case for many
A lot
of
of
the
stuff.
bills.
that's-
Yeah.
Understood. Okay. Thank you for your answer to the question, Mr. President. I just was curious about how the Pell Grant thing worked, so I appreciate it, and that's all I have. Thank you.
All right, on the amendments, any further discussion? Any objection to the committee amendments? Without objection, the amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 620 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Let's go to, ready? Let's go to judicial proceedings. Report number 20. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 46, Central Walled Striker Condominiums Sales Contracts Asbestos Disclosure, favorable with one amendment.
Recognizing the Vice Chair of the Committee is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill establishes that a contract for the sale of a condominium unit is unenforceable if the contract does not contain specified notices about the presence of asbestos. There's one committee amendment. The amendment requires that a contract for resale of a unit by a unit owner include a statement as to whether the Council of Unit Owners has knowledge of any violation of the health or building codes with respect to the individual unit being sold, the common elements assigned to the unit, or any other portion of the condo, including any violation of codes related to asbestos. Mr. President, I move the favorable committee report and the one amendment.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 46 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 57, Senator Sidnor, Evidence Wiretapping and Electronic Surveillance, Fair Housing Testing, favorable with two amendments.
Recognize the bill sponsor to the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. What this bill does is it establishes that it is lawful for a fair housing tester to wear a recorder when conducting a fair housing test on behalf of a federal government, state or local government as or a nonprofit organization. There are two amendments. One is technical, and the second limits the exceptions created by the bill to just oral communications and provides that an oral interception under this paragraph of the Wiretap Act may only be used for the purpose of enforcing federal, state, or local fair housing laws and is not admissible in any other proceeding. I ask to move the amendments as well as the favorable committee report.
All right, floor leader moves for the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report, recognizing the minority whip on the amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wonder if the bill sponsor, the floor leader, would yield for a question.
Yes, sir.
Senator,
A couple
proceed.
questions. We are a two-party consent state, and what that means is that you cannot surreptitiously or secretly record somebody without their. You can't secretly record people. You have to have their permission.
Yes, sir.
This is providing a pretty large loophole to that. It's basically saying you can go in and record somebody without their knowledge, but these folks would be agents of state government, correct, or county or city government that do this?
Yes, but to correct, it's not a large loophole. It's something that's been narrowly tailored to those who are providing or doing testing services for fair housing purposes solely.
So, but it would have to be is it a government employee, or can somebody
No,
who's not a
right.
government employee do this?
So what happens, and I can speak from my personal experience. About 20 plus years ago, I used to be a volunteer for Baltimore Neighborhoods Incorporated. Baltimore Neighborhoods Incorporated was a contractor to local governments as well as state governments in helping to enforce fair housing laws. So what would happen, you or me, I would go in, you were then trained you'll be trained in conducting fair housing testing. They would send in two people from protected classes so they could send in me as a black male, you as a white male, all of our credentials and everything is the same. You go in, you then go with, prior to this, if this law goes into effect, you would then go in, you would then have to write down what exactly happened. We would take those test results back to BNI. They would have attorneys working and looking over this information to try to determine whether or not there were any fair housing violations. What happens, though, is because we are a two-party consent state, as you mentioned, generally folk tend to believe more what they hear than what they've written or read. So the fair housing laws have not been as easily enforced here in the state of Maryland as it has been in other states that actually allow for this type of recording to occur.
Does there have to be any suspicion of wrongdoing for someone to engage in this?
No, so in my experience, you would have testing happening under two circumstances. One, there could either be a complaint or there could have been someone who may have in the past done some things, so you would go in and you're testing to make certain that they're being fair.
But there's no warrant involved?
No, no, sir.
So if we pass this bill as amended, we're allowing, is it just, again, let me ask, is it just county, like a county employee or a state employee to go in, or will we allow nonprofit employees to go in?
So generally, because your agencies that conduct fair housing testing are a handful of people, they can't do it themselves. So they would contract with a nonprofit that's been trained to do this sort of work. And to my knowledge, I believe there are about 2 that maybe do this work in the state of Maryland.
Okay. Well, so that's a little troubling to me. I understand why they have to use people to go in. They don't have enough employees to go into every, apartment complex or everywhere that's renting out properties. But it's troubling that we would be saying that I could be surreptitiously, secretly recorded, and that without my knowledge, when I am not under any suspicion of a crime or a violation necessarily. You are right that certainly one of the reasons I've supported body cameras in law enforcement is I think it's been a positive tool. It's actually shown us that in the most cases, law enforcement's doing a great job, but sometimes there's problems, and we can see that, and they can be used as a training tool, which is great.
And this will be a positive tool as well.
Well, but
and if I just may say, just to provide some context.
But we
again,
require. Well, just a moment, if I may continue my question.
Sir. Yes, sir.
We require law enforcement to let you know, unless it's an emergency, which is very carefully spelled out in the law, as I know you and I both were involved in working on that law, that law enforcement has to immediately, if I've ever been pulled over or a police officer ever approached me to discuss something with me, they immediately identify that I'm being recorded. This somebody would be showing up to see a property, and I understand why we wouldn't want them to have to identify they were recording, but I think there's a lot of potential for. Video can also be a little deceiving. It's good to have video could be conversations that are recorded can be deceiving. They can be deceptively edited. I have no doubt that there are problems in the fair housing space at times, although I would imagine it's this seems like taking a real bazooka. I mean, I could think of a lot of things we ought to consider a narrow exemption for that would allow us, if we could record people without their knowledge, we could get to the bottom of a lot of problems in society. We also could create a lot of problems. I mean, what was the rationale of the committee that this itself is why we should sort of pierce the veil of the two-party consent law?
And again, just to make certain that I'm clear, under current state law, you can videotape anything. The wiretap law prohibits the recording, the audio recording portion of it. If you remember, that's what we talked about when we had the body cameras put on. The law enforcement, they were afraid to put the cameras on, not because of the video, but because of the audio. But again, the purpose of this bill is because, as I noted, across the country that don't have the two-party consent like Maryland does, it's been certainly, in Maryland, has been more of a challenge to present and to actually win these cases when there have been some fair housing violations, because people tend not to believe just what's been written, but they have to hear what's being said.
Well, sure. I mean, that's, Mr. President, that's the challenge of trying to prove somebody. Just because we haven't, it's more challenging to prove. Well, maybe it didn't happen. I mean,
Well, that's not always the case.
Well, Mr. President, I think I've had some real concerns about this. This is breaking through what has otherwise been a pretty firm lock on two-party consent for recording in our state, audio recording in our state, wiretapping, and so I'm going to ask for a special order until the second session to work on amendments.
That is fine. Can you lay it over?
Good effort. Senator,
was all right.
Special order. I think there may have been some other. Does Senator want to press the special order motion or move to?
We can let it lay over for.
All right, Senator's motion is in order. The bill and the amendment will lie over under the rule.
Thank you.
We'll take it up next session.
Could I ask a question related to this?
It's off because it's automatic. It's an automatic motion. All right, clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 452, Senator Carter, courts, prohibited liability agreements, recreational facilities, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the senator from the 41st District as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the body, this bill that we passed last year has come out of the committee favorable with 2 amendments. Amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 exempts certain lodging establishments from the prohibition in the bill unless the establishment has recreational facilities open to the general public, and exempts health services agreements for services rendered to adults. So in general, what the bill does as amended is ensures that liability agreements that prohibit liability for negligence are not permissible at these kinds of recreational facilities. I would move the 2 amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 452 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 665, Senator Charles, Maryland Condominium Act amendments to the declaration, favorable.
I think we're, Senator from the 25th District is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill reduces from 80% to 66 2/3 the threshold of unit owners listed on the current roster of a condominium needed to consent to an amendment of the condominium's declaration once all units have been sold by a developer. However, the existing threshold of 80% is still applicable if any of the units of the condominium are owned by the developer. There were no amendments, and the bill passed favorably.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. On the report, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 665 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 708, Chair, Judicial Proceedings, Family Law, Kinship Care, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the senator from Montgomery County as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a departmental bill, and it alters the statutory provisions related to kinship care program within the Department of Human Services. It's going to alter them to further prioritize placing children in need of out-of-home placements with kinship caregivers. It expands the definition of kinship caregiver to include a kinship parent and other individuals related or unrelated who have specified bonds or connections with the child and have otherwise been identified by the child's parent. It also requires the placement of a child with a kinship caregiver if the kinship caregiver is located subsequent to the child's placement in foster care. And it specifies if a kinship caregiver cannot be located, that considerations must be taken into account when placing a child in out-of-home care. It does have two amendments. The first one is technical, and the second one alters the definition of relative to include a kinship caregiver as defined in the bill. Move for the adoption of the amendments and the favorable committee report.
All right, floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objection? Without objection, the favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 708 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 793, Senator West, Maryland Tort Claims Act, Sheriffs and Deputy Sheriffs, County Responsibility, favorable with one amendment.
Recognizing the bill sponsors, the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This MACO's-sponsored bill clarifies the responsibilities of the state and local governments for claims filed in state court against a sheriff or a deputy sheriff engaged in local law enforcement functions. Now, sheriffs have a variety of duties. In some counties, they only perform traditional state functions, such as courthouse security. But in other counties, they perform not only state functions, but local functions as well, such as detention center operations. Sometimes lawsuits arising out of the local law enforcement work performed by sheriffs and their deputies are filed against the state. There is an organization known as the Local Government's Insurance Trust, which is funded by the local counties through their insurance premiums. And that normally would pay judgments entered against the counties, but not in these cases. So, this bill, which is rather complicated, establishes a circular route for judgments entered in lawsuits arising out of local law enforcement work performed by county sheriffs and deputy sheriffs to ultimately be paid by the local government's insurance trust. It's a bit complicated to be sure, but this bill neatly solves the problem. There's one amendment which makes a clarifying language change and corrects a typographical error. There was no opposition to the bill. The vote of the committee was unanimous. I hereby move the adoption of the amendment and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objection? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 793 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 849, Senator Quarterman, Local Government Tort Claims Act, Hagerstown Multi-Use Sports and Event Facilities, favorable.
Recognizing the senator from District 1 as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, Senate Bill 849, this bill alters the definition of local government under the Local Government Tort Claims Act and includes Hagerstown Multi-Use Sports and Events Facility incorporated in Washington County. There are no committee amendments. It passed favorable. So move the favorable committee report, Mr. President.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 849 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill. Nope, that's it. What's on the back? All right, let's go to calendar 21. Clerk, read the first bill.
Senate Bill 17, Senator West, Criminal Law Crimes Relating to Animals, Conviction and Sentencing, favorable with two amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsors, the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, this bill establishes that each animal harmed in a violation of the provisions of the criminal law article dealing with crimes against animals is a separately chargeable offense. It arose from a situation in which a state's attorney discovered that an individual was keeping a pen of 20 dogs. All of them suffered from serious welts and malnutrition, serious animal abuse. Unfortunately, under the current law, he could only file a single charge against that individual. So this allows the state's attorney to file charges relating for each of the animals abused. There are two amendments. Amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 provides that each animal harmed in one of these cases is a violation, is a separate victim for the purposes specified in the amended bill. There was no opposition. The vote of the committee was unanimous. I hereby move the adoption of the two amendments as well as the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objection? Yes, Chair recognizes the senator from the 29th on the amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I could ask the floor leader for a question.
Senator may proceed.
Certainly.
Just
make it favorable.
Just a quick couple questions.
Sure.
The definition of an animal.
Yeah, I think it's just dogs. Let me check. Each animal harmed. No, the bill itself does not define animals, so we'd have to go back to the fiscal note. Wait a minute.
Because we've got it.
Let me special order this bill for 10 minutes from now. I'll get the answer, and we'll have the answer in 10 minutes.
All right, any objections to the senator's motion? Without objection, we'll special order the bill for 10 minutes and
Thank you.
take it up in just a bit. All right. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 107, Senator James, Commercial Law, Statutory Liens, Motor Vehicle Towed or Removed from Parking Lots, favorable with 3 amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsors, the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 107, with 3 clarifying and technical amendments, confirms that a person who has fully complied with the state's towing laws is to be paid before releasing the vehicle by codifying a statutory possessory lien, which is immediately released when the vehicle is reclaimed and the lawful charge is paid. The committee vote was unanimous. I move for the adoption of the 3 amendments and the favorable committee report.
All right, the floor leader moves for the adoption of the 3 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 3 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objection? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 107 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 118, Senator Muse, Criminal Procedure, Expungement and Shielding Probation Before Judgment, Driving While Impaired or Under the Influence, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsors, the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the Senate. As amended, this bill authorizes a person to file a petition for expungement under Section 10-105 of the Criminal Procedure Article if the person received a probation before judgment for a charge of violating Section 21-902A or B of the Transportation Article, driving under the influence or driving while impaired by alcohol. This petition may not be filed within 15 years after the date the petitioner was discharged from probation. The amended bill requires participation in the Ignition Interlock System program if an individual is convicted of or granting probation before judgment for a violation of Section 21-902A or B. This bill makes corresponding technical changes. There are 2 committee amendments. One is technical, one strikes provisions of the bill, amends the bill's expungement provision, and provides for the bill's interlock program. Move favorable on the report and the committee amendments.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion?
Mr. President.
Yes, Chair recognizes the senator from the 23rd District on the
May I ask
amendments.
the floor leader a question?
Will the floor leader yield?
Thank you.
Senator may proceed.
Does this also include impairment under cannabis?
I'm sorry, no.
It does not.
No, it
Strictly
doesn't.
alcohol?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any further discussion on the amendments? Any objection to the amendments? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 118 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 470, the President, Growing Apprenticeships and the Public Safety Workforce Gaps Act, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the chair is the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. As amended, this administration bill renames the Law Enforcement Cadet Apprenticeship Program in the Maryland Department of Labor to the Public Safety Apprenticeship Program and expands the purposes and the scope of the program, including expanding eligibility for the program to include public safety agencies instead of just law enforcement agencies. The amended bill also alters the eligibility criteria and the types of grants that may be awarded under the program. In addition, the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission must develop mental health wellness policies and to be implemented in the law enforcement agencies and correctional facilities in the state. It must submit related annual report. And finally, the bill establishes a work group on growing engagement in the law enforcement and corrections workforce. It'll be staffed by MPTSC. It'll also identify and study the shortage of employees in the law enforcement fields. It'll determine ways to advertise and promote law enforcement employment opportunities across the state. It'll also explore recruitment and retention strategies used in the law enforcement and correctional fields that have been successful in other states and countries. And finally, it'll make recommendations on incentives or other methods to increase the number of employees in the law enforcement workforce. A related reporting requirement is established in the bill. The bill takes effect June 1st, 2024. Provisions relating to the work group are terminate June 30th, 2025. Mr. President, there are two amendments. One is technical. Amendment number 2 alters and adds provisions of the bill relating to the grant funding, health and wellness policies, and the work group as specified. Mr. President, I move for the adoption of the two committee amendments in the favorable committee report.
Floor leader is moving for the adoption of the two committee amendments in the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 470 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 687, Senator Smith, Criminal Procedure, Bail Bonds, 7th Judicial Circuit, favorable.
Recognizing the chair as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill repeals provisions relating to bail bonds in the 7th Judicial Circuit. Specifically, the bill repeals Section 5-203 of the Criminal Procedure Article governing bail, bonds persons, and related fees in the 7th Judicial Circuit, and repeals Section 5-209B of this Criminal Procedure Article, exempting the 7th Circuit from certain requirements. Mr. President, there are no committee amendments. I move for the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Recognizing the senator from the 28th District on the report.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. May I have a question with the floor leader, please?
Floor to yield. Senator may proceed.
Yeah, thank you. So the 7th Judicial District, which counties is that? I'm not really clear.
That's Calvert, Charles, Prince George's, and St. Mary's counties. And this is those are the only 3 counties that have this on the books. Across the state, the rules kind of govern this procedure, so this brings it in line with the rest of the state.
Okay, and what does this bill do, actually, when you say bringing it in line? I mean, folks reached out to me like a couple of days ago, and what I think about this, and I've just recently heard about it, so I haven't able to reach out to any of the stakeholders. So if you could tell me what this does, please.
So for instance, under current law, the circuit court has to adopt rules setting the terms and conditions of bail bonds. And so under the current law, the 7th Circuit and the approved bail bondsmen that operate there, they must pay a license fee of 1% to the gross value of the bail bonds when written. And it's essentially, this bill deals with the way that property is valued or leveraged when you cast a bond. And so, for instance, in this circuit, there is the actual value of the property that you use to leverage for the bond is not something that's required. And so what's happened is they've had instances in which people have leveraged property for a bond, and they actually didn't have, the money was not there. The assets were not valued properly. And so this, again, just moves this into in alignment to what the rest of the state does.
Okay, so if someone gets arrested, they have to post bond. What changes from how it happens now to under this bill? What would change for that, say, individual who would?
It's essentially it's essentially just the way in which the property is valued and how that's verified for the bond.
So does it make it easier for someone to get bond, or harder, or?
I wouldn't say that it makes it either. It just changes the way that the court will be able to verify the value of the property for the bond and for the bondsman. So it's actually better for the bondsman. I mean, for that industry, because then they're actually getting an asset that's actually fully valued.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for the answers.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. On the report, any further discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 687 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 894, Senator Carter, Baltimore City Control Over Powers of Police Commissioner, favorable with 2 amendments.
All right. Can we, the chair move to special order the bill for 10 minutes?
Yes, Mr. President. Yes, I also think we skipped a bill on the calendar. Senate Bill 890 is, that is 890, that's this one.
That is 890.
Yeah, I think the description that was read over was 894, but
890.
That's proper, and that's right.
Do we want to do, and this one we do want to?
We want to do this, and then the next one we'll special order for 10 minutes.
Perfect. Recognizing the chair as the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. As amended, this bill alters the circumstances under which an individual who has been erroneously convicted, sentenced, and confined may receive compensation under the provisions known as the Walter Lomax Act. It alters the benefits available to these individuals and requires the state to notify the individual in writing and provide specific information when it intends to introduce evidence to reduce or prevent an award of compensation to an individual who serves a concurrent sentence for law enforcement for a lawful conviction and confinement. And it repeals obsolete provisions of the bill, expands the eligibility for compensation for individuals erroneously convicted, sentenced, or confined for conspiracy to commit felony. Amendment number 1 expands the eligibility for compensation and provides a 2-year window for the newly eligible individuals to apply for compensation. Mr. President, essentially what this does is it expands eligibility for the Walter Lomax Act to folks that have been convicted for conspiracy to commit a felony, and it expands the window which you can apply to that for those benefits for 2 years. Mr. President, I'd move for the adoption of the one amendment in the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the one committee amendment, the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 890 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 894, Senator Carter, Baltimore City, control over powers of police commissioner, favorable with 2 amendments.
All right, floor leader, recognizing the senator from Baltimore County is the floor leader.
Thank you very much. Senate Bill 894 completes the task and makes certain that the citizens of Baltimore City control their police department. So they had 2 amendments. One is technical, and the second makes the bill provisions contingent as specified. I move the 2 amendments and as well as the committee's favorable report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 894 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 1039, Frederick County Senators, Frederick County Juveniles Truancy Reduction Pilot Program, favorable.
Recognizing the senator from District 4 is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 1039 authorizes the Circuit Administrative Judge of the 6th Judicial Circuit to establish a truancy reduction pilot program in the juvenile court in Frederick County. There are no committee amendments. Mr. President, I move the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 1039 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 1101, Senator Smith, Scholarships and Police Officer Recruitment, favorable, 2 amendments.
Recognize the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, this bill alters the definition of an eligible institution for the Maryland Police Officers and Probation Agents Scholarship Program to include a community college in the state. This is an emergency bill. Mr. President, there are 2 committee amendments. One is technical and adds sponsors and makes the bill an emergency bill. And amendment number 2 strikes provisions of the bill and alters the definition of an eligible institution. Mr. President, I'd like to thank the senator from St. Mary's County for his work on this. I think this will go a long way in recruiting and retaining our law enforcement officers. So, Mr. President, I move for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 1101 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Madam Clerk, could we bring back the bill that we had 10-minute special order on? Senate Bill 17. All right, Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 17, Senator West, Criminal Law, Crimes Relating to Animals, Conviction and Sentencing, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. The answer to the question about what the definition of animal is an animal means any animal except human beings. So in light of that fact...
Could the Senator say that one more time? Couldn't hear.
Animal means any animal except human beings. That's the definition of the code. So in light of that fact, the senator from St. Mary's County is going to have an amendment prepared which will be accepted as a friendly amendment to define in this bill the definition of animal as domestic animal.
Huh.
So I'll have to special order this bill till the next session so we can get the amendment.
Do we want to lay it? Do you want
lay it over?
Lay it over.
Lay it over. Fine.
Okay. All right. Motion is in order. The bill will be laid over under the rule. All right. Interesting. Learn something new every day. It's the beauty of the General Assembly session. All right. Let's go over. Actually, do we have, can I get that back, actually? I don't see our chair. Let's go to, well, can we ring the bells? Well, we may be able to get to it. Let's see if we have the floors here. This is Budget and Tax Report 11. All right, clerk, read the bill.
Senate Bill 35, Senator McCray, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, State Supplement, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the bill sponsors, the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 35, as amended, lowers the requirement that a household, including an individual who is at least years of age, to receive supplemental income. It also raises the benefit to $50 per month, Mr. President. There are 2 amendments. One makes technical changes to the title. Number 2 lowers the threshold from 62 to 60 for the age and increases the supplemental monthly benefit from $40 to $50. Move adoption of the committee report, Mr. President.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Chair recognizes the minority leader on the amendments.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The floor leader yield, please.
Yes, sir.
Senator may proceed.
Just could you tell me how the amendments affect the fiscal note? Looking at the fiscal note for 2025, $36 million a year, $48 million a year for 26 through 29. Just how it affects that.
So the age, first this was open to everyone, and it was also way up to $95. So we got it up to 10 and got it lowered to 2 years, and that gets us to about a $4 million fiscal note.
About $4 million?
Yes,
Is
sir.
that what we said? So it brought it down from 36 to 4 or 48 to 4?
48 to 4.
48 to 4, and obviously the budget took care of that requirement.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, on the amendments, any further discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 35 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 733, Senator Carter, Task Force to Study Transparency and Tax Incentives, favorable.
Recognizing Senator from Montgomery County is the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Colleagues, Senate Bill 733 establishes a task force to study transparency and tax incentives within the State Department of Assessments and Taxation. There was no opposition to this bill. The bill will take effect July 1st and terminates, sunsets in December of 2025. There are no committee amendments. I move adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. On the report, any discussion? Any objections? Are we sure there are no objections? No.
Mr. President, you want me to explain? So it's still, this is, so again, as we're looking at transparency and taxes, this is just another way of us to take a close look at it, especially when it comes to, property taxes, local taxes. So
thank you.
Again, no opposition to this bill, and I urge a favorable report.
Much appreciated. All right, on the report, any further discussion? Objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 733 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 1014, Senator Charles, State Procurement, Minority Business Enterprises, and Small Business Enterprises, Procurement Forecast and Outreach, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the Senator from District 6 is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 1014, as amended, requires each state procurement unit by June the 30th of each year to submit to the Governor's Office of Small Minority and Women Business Affairs a procurement forecast listing all procurements for the upcoming fiscal year above $100,000 to provide the office with a reconciliation of prior fiscal year procurement forecasts by August the 15th. It also requires a GOS-BA in consultation with primary procurements units to consult with each primary procurement unit to identify potential contracting opportunities for and increase outreach efforts to small business to provide procurement-related support for small businesses. Mr. President, there's 2 amendments. One is technical for the change of the title. The second strikes a requirement for each procurement unit to publish its procurement forecast on the website, required each procurement unit to provide the forecast and reconciliation information to GOSBA, and require GOSBA to publish the information on its website. I move for adoption for the favorable report. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, further moves to the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objection? Any objections? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 1014 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 1080, Senator McCray, State Personnel, Maryland Department of Health, pay rates favorable with two amendments.
Recognize the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you again, Mr. President. Senate Bill 1080, as amended, includes bargaining unit G for teachers and librarians in the requirements under current law that the pay rate for the specified employees at Clifton T. Perkins Hospital who are not receiving a forensic pay premium be at least 2 grades higher than their pay rate effective June 30th, 2020, and the pay rate for the specified employees in the Behavioral Health Administration or the Developmental Disabilities Administration be equal to the pay rate 2 grades higher than the employees at Perkins if the employees worked at specified locations. These locations include, under current law, at a facility that the forensic admissions rate greater than 75% for the RICA locations, Baltimore and Rockville. There are 2 amendments, Mr. President. Amendment number 1 makes technical changes to the title, and amendment number 2 clarifies the employee's position affected by the bill and specifies the pay rate for DDA and BHA employees to get the 2 grades higher than pay rate effective July 2020. Move adoption of the committee report, Mr. President.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments in the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 1080 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Let's go to report number 12. Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 1094, Senator McKay, State Lake Protection and Restoration Fund, alteration and extension, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the senator from District 2 as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 1094, as amended, extends the termination date of the State Lakes Protection and Restoration Fund from June 30, 2025 to June 30, 2027. There are 2 committee amendments. Amendment number 1 is technical and adds co-sponsors. Amendment number 2 amends the bill as previously described. Move adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 1094 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Let's go to B&T report number 13. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 628, Senator Guile, State Finance Catastrophic Event Account and Federal Government Shutdown Employee Assistance Loan Fund, non-civilian federal employees, favorable.
Recognizing the senator from District 27 as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, Senate Bill 628 expands the purpose of the Catastrophic Event Account and the Federal Government Shutdown Employee Assistance Loan Fund so that the funds may be used to provide financial assistance to federal non-civilian, that's our uniformed services personnel, employees, in addition to federal civilian employees as authorized under the current law in the event of a full or partial federal government shutdown due to a lapse in appropriations. There were no amendments. Move adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. On the report, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 628 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 892, Senator McCray, School Construction Public Charter School Facility Fund Establishment, favorable with 1 amendment.
Recognizing the bill sponsor is the floor leader.
Thank you again, Mr. President. Senate Bill 892 creates the Public Charter School Facility Fund administered by the Interagency Commission on School Construction to provide funding to public charter schools for eligible expenses associated with our respective public charter school facilities. The governor is authorized to include an annual appropriation in the budget bill per student enrolled in a public charter school. There is one amendment that adds sponsors to the bill, Mr. President. Move adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. On to the amended report, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 892 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Let's go to report number 14. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 579, Senator Gazzone, Primary and Secondary Education Breakfast and Lunch Programs, Universal Expansion, favorable with 2 amendments.
All right, the chair of the, oh, sorry. There, sorry, Madam
Thank
Majority
you,
Leader.
Mr. President.
Yes.
I'm so little today, maybe. Senate Bill 579, as amended, requires the Department of Education to submit a report to the General Assembly on the feasibility of providing free breakfast and lunch to all students in Maryland Public Schools. There are 2 committee amendments. The first is technical, and the second strikes the bill as introduced and instead requires a report, and the amendment sunsets the bill in 1 year. I move adoption of the committee amendment and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report, recognizing the minority leader on the amendments.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The floor leader, I would assume that the amendments dramatically reduce the $180 million annual fiscal note?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. On the amendments, any further discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 579 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill. Is it not on? Do we not have it on the report? One moment. All good. There we go. Huh. There we go. It's breaking the system.
Yeah, all right. Senate Bill 963, Carroll County Senators, Carroll County Office of Permits and Inspections, denial of permit and license for unpaid personal property taxes, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognized Senator from District 6 is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a local bill, Senate Bill 968 as amended, authorize Carroll County Office of Permits and Inspections to deny issuance or renewal of a commercial license or permit of applications who have unpaid personal property tax and that the taxpayer has not disputed. So 2 amendments. One is the first is a technical, and the second is it alters the bill as I have already stated. Move favorable to the amendments of committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any amendments, further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 963 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. All right, let's go to report number 1515 out of Budget and Tax. Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 673, Central Charles State Procurement Small and Minority Business Reserve Program, Perrin J. Mitchell, MBE, Prime Contracting Act, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the senator from District 6 is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 673 as amended increases the participation goal for the Small Business Reserve Program from 15 to 20%. It alters the method of determining a unit achievement of gold, requires MDOT in consultation with GOSBA to develop an outreach program and alters report requirements. There's the two amendments. The technical amendment, which changes the title. Second, strikes the bill as introduced and instead increases the participation goal for small business reserve program from 15 to 20% and alters the method of determining a unit achievement of the goal. Requires MDOT in consultation with GOSBA to develop an outreach program and alters reporting requirements. I move adoption of the amendments in the favorable report, Mr. President.
Further moves for the adoption of the two committee amendments in the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Recognizing the senator from the 25th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to thank the good senator for carrying two Black Caucus priorities for us on the floor. So thank you, sir. We appreciate you.
All right.
You're kindly welcome.
Excellent. All right. On the favorable report, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 673 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. All right, let's we've got a number of kind of one-offs here. Let's start with Special Order Calendar number 49. Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 905, Senator Kelly, Public Safety Extreme Risk Protective Orders Review of Court Records. Question is on the adoption of the favorable report.
All right, question is on the adoption of the favorable committee report. Looks like we have the minority whip on the report.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to see if I could ask a question to better understand what it is we're doing here. Could I ask the floor leader a question, or the chair?
Senator may,
yeah.
Senator may proceed.
Floor leader. So I was looking at this bill, and actually I thought there might have been somebody with amendments, but so look through the bill. I was a little confused about what we're allowing. We're allowing these are private records, aren't they? Are they private? They're not public records, correct?
So these are court records for extreme risk protective orders. So they're, I wouldn't say private is the wrong characterization, but they're court records.
But they're not available on, say, Maryland Case Search or something of that nature.
No, they're not. That's right.
Okay. So who currently has, besides the court, who else has access to these records now?
So the court has the ability to give the Department of Health, they have the ability to deem whomever they believe should have access to it. What else? There's Department of Health. It's right here. Hold on. Give me a second. Respondent or their counsel.
Okay.
Give me 30 seconds. I have the list. Just if you could.
I'm assuming the respondent and their counsel.
That's right.
And obviously, I would assume the person who filed for the order has the record.
Local behavioral health authorities, I mentioned. Oh, here we go. So it's the health department, the court personnel, law enforcement, local behavioral health authorities, and a person authorized by a court order on good cause shown.
What's an example of somebody who would be authorized on the basis of good cause shown to have access to this kind of protective order record?
You have an answer to that?
No. The health department has it.
No, we didn't receive testimony on that, but we could ask with the judiciary what their practice is on that.
Sure, okay. But the health department gets it. Why would the health department get extreme risk protective orders? What is this? Describe what this is. I assume it's domestic violence situations, correct?
That and, I mean, so there is a nexus there with that and gun suicide. And so that was the testimony that we received from, in particular, Johns Hopkins University, some of the folks affiliated there. They want to understand kind of the nexus between some of these ERPOs, the extreme risk protective orders, and suicide, but then also the efficacy of them and how they're being used. And so what this bill does is allow for that information to go into this university academic setting that's controlled by something called an institutional review board that sets forth standards for how the information can be used, the privacy procedures, and some of the repercussions for not adhering to the very high standards to protect privacy. And this is standard practice. I mean, ERPOs are one thing, right? This is happening, but this is when you have these IRBs and the universities across the country do research on subject matter just like this all of the time, and that's why you have IRBs, which are governed by federal statutes, and so.
So
this
wait,
is
you're telling me, not to interrupt you, just so I can clarify, you're telling me that these internal or institutional review boards, IRBs, they are governed by federal law and how they treat sensitive and confidential information?
That's exactly right. So it's the Health and Human Services. That's a federal statute that governs how IRBs have to administer their programs. And so when you are an academic institution and you're seeking approval to do one of these studies or access to this information, you've got to submit that application to the IRB, and there's a very lengthy process. It could take months to do this, and they go through kind of soup to nuts. What are you studying? What are you going to study it for? What are the controls for information? Those new standards have actually risen to control for access to digital information as well. So that's why when we were in a committee, and we had a lot of concerns of folks trying to understand how data was going to be protected, how personal information would be protected, how names would be protected. I felt comfortable voting for this bill because of the strict and stringent standards imposed by the IRB, which are controlled by the federal statute by Health and Human Services. So at first blush, this seems like, and I'm kind of over talking this, but at first blush, this seems like this is, this could be, thanks, Senator. At first blush, it seems like it could seem precarious, but it's actually quite stringent.
I'm glad you're actually taking some time to explain it, quite frankly, because, I mean, this is something very sensitive. Somebody has had this filed against them, and in many cases, it may have well been warranted, but it was probably on one about the worst period of their life, and the person that filed it was probably undergoing the worst period of their life. And so I think we just want to be real sensitive about how we handle this kind of information. And I appreciate the explanation. I'm glad to know about the IRB and that process. Are we redacting name and address and information?
No, so that information, when it is ported over, is not redacted, but there are processes to anonymize that information once it gets over to the university. And those are some of the standards that are kind of stipulated by the IRB in their approval process. And so they set forth some of those standards to make sure that information, whenever it's entered into like a database, is anonymized.
Okay, so the only people that will see it at the university system is whoever gets it to then submit it, the request to IRB to study this information?
That's correct, and those people have to be trained, and they have to be certified through, I think, more than 5 courses that.
And they handle lots of confidential information, correct?
Yeah, I mean, this is standard protocol for these universities to engage in this type of study across a myriad of subject matter.
But we don't want to redact name and address because the courts are not going to do that for us. So therefore, that it's going to get redacted once it gets to the university as it's going through an IRB review process.
Well, we talked about the senator from Frederick in particular talked about redacting, and I thought that was a great idea. But the fiscal impact would be prohibitive, and what the procedures are for here is when that information goes into the university, if they enter it into a database, it has to be anonymized.
Okay, so before it goes into any sort of database that anybody else has access to, it has to be anonymous. Are we including erroneous applications of ERPOs? Like, is it going to be when an ERPO was filed and then turns out to not be founded, or?
Yeah, I believe that's the case. Yeah, I think because part of the reason you want to port in all that information to understand, hey, maybe there's a large number of these that are
getting filed and they're not working out.
Exactly right. So that's part of the study.
And then I guess, could you tell me what the difference is between a red flag type emergency petition versus an ERPO, and why we didn't just, because if I remember correctly, the ERPO, when we talked about red flag, we looked at ERPOs, I remember, but it was a while ago. So why is that? There's a difference between the two, correct?
We did that a couple years. I think you were on JP.
I was. I'm trying to remember the exact details.
It's just the parlance. So across it's either ERPO or red flag. It's the same
thing.
So
so these are red flag petitions.
Yes.
This is what these are.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, Okay, so the reason I'm taking the time to discuss this on the floor, maybe more so not for the chairman, who I think understands the seriousness of this, but for the body that may understand why we get up and ask these questions, is I think it's just really important. The red flag law allowed for us to, before a crime was committed, in fact, before there was suspicion of a planned crime even, for somebody to say, somebody close to a person, had to be somebody close to a person, but to somebody to say, I think this person is dangerous, you should go in and take away constitutional rights that they have. Our law at least was written tight enough to where they have to get in front of a judge pretty quickly, and if the judge finds that it's incorrect, they have their rights restored. I voted against that at the time, which is always a tough vote, because of course we want, if we feel somebody's dangerous, we want there to be some sort of way to get at that before they do something bad. But we also have a constitution, and we have constitutional rights. And so, big reason I had to vote against the bills, I just felt like you can't make a determination, take somebody's rights away before there's reasonable suspicion that they've done something wrong. And the bill still passed, and I'm glad we worked on it because it's tighter. But now what we're talking about is allowing these ERPOs to be given to a university system for academic research. And I believe what the chairman has said. I know I'm sure he's telling of course, the truth, and there's a process, but there's an agenda behind it to some extent too from these universities. And I don't think the universities are going to be looking at this to figure out that this is actually a good program, that this is actually, they're looking to try to prove that we need this and need more of this. So I'm just concerned about the privacy of people. And I don't have an amendment, Mr. President. I know this is on the favorite report. I don't have an amendment, Mr. President, but I just very concerned about this kind of thing being studied and used to draw conclusions about things. When someone files an ERPO, they file a red flag petition, and someone has it filed on them, it is an incredibly disruptive thing in their life. And there may be many cases where it's somebody who was dangerous, but there's also a lot of cases where they weren't. And so I think it's a lot of concerns about this bill. I don't have an amendment at this time, Mr. President, but I just registering that since I've taken the time, but I'm saying this now. I think we need to be, I would really caution the body against opening these kinds of things up too broadly for them to be reviewed, because the wrong conclusions can be drawn. I'll let it go at this point. I'll certainly look at what's been said. I'm glad to know there's at least some confidentiality in the process, but I have a lot of concerns. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right. On the report, Chair recognizes the Senator from District 4.
I'm going to apologize in advance, Mr. President, but could the floor leader please yield for a question?
Senator may proceed.
Senator, I was under the impression when we left this the other day that there was an amendment forthcoming regarding HIPAA, because there's a lot of privileged health information that may be written in these reports relative to the person that we're not redacting the information from. So I was under the impression that council was writing an amendment on that, and that we weren't, it was forthcoming, and that we were waiting on that amendment before we got to this point.
I'm informed that, I guess, the member never met with council to submit the amendment. So,
Mr. President, may we lay the bill over for the purposes of that amendment, please?
A layover would not be in order, but a senator could special order it.
Special order it so that give the senator time to, they were under the impression it was being written, and clearly it's not. So if we could special order it to the next session.
Yeah, plenty of time, so.
I'll honor that.
All right, any objections to the special order? Without objection, the bill will be special ordered to the appropriate time at the second session today. All right, let's go to the special order calendar number 50. Number 50, can we please ring the bells? All right. Clerk will read the report.
Executive Nominations Report number 5. Question is, will the Senate advise and consent to the nominations of the executive?
All right, question is on the report number 5, recognizing the chair of the committee.
Mr. President, I want to move that we adopt this report favorable with the exceptions of number 12 and 13.
Senator, could you read those one more time, sir?
Number 12 and number 13.
12 and 13 to vote separately. Any further separations on the report? 12 and 13. If not, the question before the body is, will the Senate advise and consent to the nominations of the executive, but not nominees 12 and 13? Any discussion? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 45 votes in the affirmative, the Senate of Maryland advises and consents affirmatively to the nominees. Clerk will read the next order of business. All right, recognizing the chair of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we move favorable on the nominations number 12 and 13.
All right, question before the Senate is, will the Senate advise and consent to the nominees 12 and 13 on report number 5? Any discussion? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 44 votes in the affirmative, the Senate advises and consents affirmatively to the nomination of nominees 12 and 13. Let's see. We've got special order calendar number 51. Actually, let's hold this, see if we're right. Sure? Okay. All right. Special order calendar number 51. Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 366, Senator Mouts, Employees and Teacher Retirement Pension Systems, Reemployment of Retirees. Bill is on third reading for final passage.
All right, bill's on third reading for final passage. Recognize the minority leader.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. President. I did speak with the bill sponsor on this specifically this morning, and he certainly appreciates everyone's thoughtfulness in allowing this to be held for his vote, but given the circumstances, he requested it move forward.
All right, excellent. Okay. On the bill, any further discussion? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 45 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 366, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. All right, we've got a few more second readers. Let's just go to the special order calendar number 52. Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 797, Senator Hester, Education, Access to Attorneys, Advocates, and Consultants for Special Education Program and Fund established. Bill is on second reading and open to amendment.
Recognizing Chair of Budget and Tax.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have an amendment.
Pages will collect and distribute the Senator's amendment. All right. Senator may explain the amendment.
All this amendment does is make sure that the flow of money goes through the right entities to make sure that it all works together correctly. It's actually, we're going to have to change an item in the budget later also during conference to make it all work.
All right.
Move amendment.
Senator moves the amendment. Any discussion of the amendment? Chair recognizes the Senator from District 9.
We take this as a friendly amendment.
Oh, right. It was a triple E bill. Yeah, yes, of course. Floor leader. Right. All right. Any objections to the amendment? All right. Without objection, the amendment is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 797 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Let's go to Special Order Calendar 53. Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 784, Senator Elfrith, Comprehensive Community Safety Funding Act. Question is on the adoption of the two committee amendments in the favorable report.
All right. Question is on the adoption of the two committee amendments. Chair recognizes the senator from the 42nd District on the amendments.
Oh, I don't think I wanted, are we talking about amendments? I had
Committee
asked
amendments.
a question. I had asked a question the last time around, and we special ordered it so the bill sponsor could, the floor leader could try to get some answers.
All right. Let's hear from the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator, thank you for your questions. We did do some digging, and while this body did pass a bill establishing the Gun Data Center through the state police in 2022, we spoke with state police just yesterday, and that data center is about 18 months away from being up and running, and so they currently do not collect the data I believe you were seeking.
Okay, so let's be clear about this. The reason for the extra 5% sales tax, which is only imposed on people exercising their Second Amendment rights to buy guns, is allegedly because those guns are being used and people who are being injured by those guns are finding their way to shock trauma. But now there is no data which indicates how many of those guns have actually produced the injuries of the people being admitted to shock trauma, correct?
I don't have universal data, Senator, but we did look at some of the especially high-profile cases from across the state that have made the headlines, certainly cases that have shaken the district I have the privilege of representing. If I may, Mr. President, just a few, I mentioned this yesterday, but the mass shooting at the Capitol Gazette in 2018, killing 5 of my constituents, that was a legally purchased long gun. In Howard County, just earlier in this year in 2024, a father of 3 killed his teenage children with a legally purchased gun. In 2022, in Baltimore, a 15-year-old killed a 9-year-old because a legally purchased gun was improperly stored. In 2024, in Baltimore County, a 23-year-old was shot and killed by her boyfriend, the legal owner of a licensed gun. In Anne Arundel County, again, just this calendar year, a 66-year-old gun owner shot himself at a gun range. In St. Mary's County in 2018, the Great Mills High School shooting that shook many of us, that gun was legally obtained. It was a legally purchased gun that was, again, improperly stored. And so, Mr. President, I would venture that unless it is a ghost gun, a 3D printed gun, every gun that has made its way into the market was originally purchased legally or stolen, lost, stolen, etc., but they all, unless it was a 3D purchased gun, originated through a legal purchase.
But as I understand it, the money from this extra sales tax, which is only being imposed on people seeking to exercise their Second Amendment rights, that money is being directed to shock trauma.
Yes.
Were any of those horrible instances that you recited, did they result in people going to shock trauma and being treated at shock trauma?
Not the ones that I just referenced, Senator, but a few other cases. In 2021, 2 people died and 3 recovered in Essex at the shooting at the Row of Farms, again with a legally purchased gun. I'm not sure where the survivors of that shooting were transported to, but luckily we have, again, a world-class trauma system, and the majority of gunshot wound victims either end up at shock trauma or at our other trauma centers because they are uniquely qualified to deal with these horrendous acts of violence. In 2020, in Aberdeen, 6 people were shot and 3 more died, again, with a legally purchased and owned gun. Just right up the road. So, Senator, again, the genesis of any gun, unless it's a 3D printed, a ghost gun, would have begun with a legal purchase.
Would you not agree with me that many of the injuries being sustained by people on the streets of Baltimore and the people who find their way into shock trauma, that those injuries are being inflicted with ghost guns and with guns bought on the black market illegally by drug gangs?
Senator, I do not have that data, so I would not be able to agree with that
Okay.
statement.
Then last question, can you state to us today that any instance of a person finding his or her way into shock trauma because of an injury inflicted by a gun, suffered that injury as a result of a gun purchased legally by a law-abiding citizen exercising his or her Second Amendment rights? Is there any instance you can refer to us where that happened?
Where somebody legally purchased a gun, exercising his or her
Second
Second Amendment
Amendment
rights,
and
made
then-
their way to shock trauma directly?
And some victim ended up in shock trauma as a result of being injured by that weapon.
By that particular weapon. I don't have that data, Senator, but I do have data that suggests that from 2003 to 2018, 28.4% of gun suicides in Maryland alone were used long guns in that circumstance, and the proportion of long guns used was the highest and most in rural counties. I also have a statistic here that apparently we study this by congressional district, and Congressional District 1 had the highest rate of suicide in Maryland, 6.9 suicides by gun out of 100,000 people. So I don't have the specific data you're referencing, but again, every gun, unless it is a ghost gun, 3D printed gun, was originally legally purchased or stolen from a firearms dealer, but those guns are ending up, in one way or another, creating havoc, which our trauma centers are then responsible for healing.
I think you've answered my question, that this bill is premised on the assumption that guns purchased by law-abiding citizens who are going to be subjected to this tax are responsible for people ending up in shock trauma, to which the proceeds of this tax are going to be directed. But there is no data tying those particular guns to the injuries sustained by people who end up in shock trauma, correct?
At this moment, while the gun data center is being stood up by the state police, we do not have, that doesn't mean the data doesn't, what you're saying isn't true, it's just that we do not currently have that data.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, on the committee amendments, any further discussion on the committee amendments? Any objections to the committee amendments? Without objection, the committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Recognizing an amendment on the favorable report as amended. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable report as amended is adopted. The minority whip has an amendment the size of a textbook, appears. All right. The pages will collect and distribute the senator's very large amendment. Is this one of those pass the amendment and know what's in it? Senator may explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I did share the amendment with the floor leader on the bill.
I do appreciate that, Senator.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. So, Mr. President, we've heard some discussion already today about sort of the tenuous connection between having a tax on every law-abiding purchase of firearms, and not just firearms, but accessories and other types of ammunition and other types of products involved with firearms. Legal purchase by law-abiding citizens, and this is nearly doubling the sales tax on these products. This sales tax doubling will decimate small businesses in our state who have been following the law and are very careful about the job that they do to make sure that the law is followed. It's going to drive up the cost for people who are engaging legitimately in their Second Amendment right to keep and bear a firearm. People who people who may come into our state to hunt will now make sure they buy products and ammunition before they get here. And people in our state will be punished that are going to hunt, to target practice, to protect themselves and their families and their property with this very punitive doubling, near doubling of the sales tax. We have the testimony that we've heard on the floor here that around 10% of the cases in shock trauma are from firearms. We know that the large percentage of those shootings come from not just illegal activity, obviously, because there's actually, interestingly enough, there's not been an accidental hunting death in Maryland in over 100 years. There may be occasional accidental shots but in fact, from my knowledge, recollection from several years ago, and I haven't heard anything since, I don't believe there's rarely been someone where someone else was shot by another hunter and had to even, but there's definitely not been a death. And so we know that most of the 10% of the shock trauma cases that are gunshots are from illegal activity and almost always from an illegally obtained gun. Almost always. Sure, there's some cases where it's not the case. And what we've done with this is you're doubling the sales tax, almost doubling the sales tax on law-abiding citizens, and you're going to punish and put small businesses out of business. Now, I do know that the premise of the bill and the stated reason for the bill is that we need to find funding revenues for shock trauma. And our shock trauma system is incredibly important. We all agree with that. I would argue, by the way, that if you polled all of the citizens in Maryland and explained to them the balance that we have to do in our state budget, I bet most of them would say, you probably should put all the shock trauma funding in the budget first. And maybe we find an extra sales tax on some of the less important stuff that we have in our state's government. I would bet we could figure that out. But that aside, that's not this amendment. What this amendment would do is it would wipe away the sales tax on law-abiding citizens and punishing small businesses for having the nerve to sell firearms and firearm accessories and ammunition. It wipes that away. And instead what it does is it puts the responsibility for finding some additional funding for shock trauma, which is a worthy goal, on the folks who do things wrong with firearms. So what I have in this amendment, and it is 41 pages, you're welcome to read it. I've been talking long enough for you to have an opportunity to read, I would think, 2 or 3 pages by now. This would double the fine on all firearm-related crimes, as our JPR friends know, and probably most of you know. Most of the time, if you have a criminal penalty for some criminal activity with a firearm, there's a jail sentence recommendation attached to that, and then there's also an and/or fine. This doubles the fine on all firearm-related crimes. And let me be clear, this doesn't just hit nefarious criminal activity, which it does. Folks who would use a gun in the commission of a felony, it would double the fine on those folks. It would, if you're possessing a firearm when you're a prohibited person, you've committed a felony, you're not supposed to have a firearm, there's a fine for that. This doubles the fine on possessing a firearm when you are prohibited. This would double the fine. If you have a firearm, and this is a more recent law we passed, within 1,000 yards of a demonstration, after you were warned by the police and you persist in having a firearm with you, this would double the fine on that. This would double the fine for if you have a crime you've committed relative to hunting violations, double the fine on that. So it's not just picking on one area. This is everybody that commits a crime with a firearm would now pay a much higher fine, and it takes that extra, that new amount, and puts it towards shock trauma funding. So, Mr. President, I would encourage the body, let's back away from a punitive sales tax that will be challenged in court. Without question, it'll be challenged in court. I believe it has a lot of constitutional problems with it, as the senator from District 42 has pointed out. Let's back away from that. Instead, let's put the responsibility, if we're saying we need more money for shock trauma and it needs to come from a source dealing with firearms, let's put our money where our mouth is. Let's put it on the people who've committed the crimes. So I would move my amendment. I consider it a friendly amendment, Mr. President, and I'd ask for the body's support.
Mr. President, before I respond to the maker of the amendment, if I could just address, I'm not sure we can agree when you said the majority of folks presenting at shock trauma are victims in Baltimore City, the victims of illegally handled guns. We don't have that data, as I've mentioned on the floor before. And as I've mentioned, my own community, my own district, agree to disagree, but my own district experiences gun violence to a degree that is unacceptable here and unacceptable, frankly, throughout the state. Fortunately, regardless of where you are in the state, because of our trauma system, which includes EMS training, the state police helicopters, everything. Again, you have a 99% survival rate or chance of survival if you get to shock trauma, which is the hub of the spoke, within 1 hour. So just to respond to the original premise, I respect and understand the purpose of the maker of the amendment, but I'm afraid what your amendment does is it strikes entirely the bill and replaces it with this premise that folks who are convicted should subsidize the system. If I may, Mr. President, defer to the chair of the committee.
Let's hear from the chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. What I'd like to do is special order this to the second session today. I think we want to evaluate what might be generated by this amendment.
All right. Any objection to the motion of special order for the second session today? Not. We will, motion carries. We'll take it up in the second session today. All right. Let's go to special order calendar number 54. Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 1092, Senator Gazzone, Vehicle Registration Emergency Medical System Surcharge, Increase and Distribution of Funds. Question is on the adoption of the 4 committee amendments and the favorable report.
All right. Recognizing the chair of the committee.
Have an amendment, Mr. President.
All right. Senator has I'm sorry. Hold on. Let's. That's my fault. All right. Questions on the 4 committee amendments. Any objection to the 4 committee amendments? Without objection, the 4 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. The chair has an amendment. The pages will collect and distribute the amendment. Senator may explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is actually a substitute amendment. I'd like to withdraw the original committee amendment. This amendment was discussed earlier this morning and voted on by committee unanimously.
So it was that was doubly my fault on this one. The chair's the chair had it correct here. So we are going to reconsider the vote by which the favorable report was adopted. Are there any objections to that motion? Without objection, so ordered. And then reconsider the vote by which the committee amendments were put onto the bill. Are there any objections to that? I apologize to the Secretary of the Senate's office and the proceedings clerk for this, this slight snafu. If there are no objections, the motion carries. The Senator has now moved to substitute the committee amendments with the amendments that are now introduced. Madam Clerk, if we could get those. So this would now be the substitute committee amendments. All right, the Senator may explain the amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. So just to be clear, this amendment, or these 4 amendments, actually include the other amendments, or 3 of the other amendments, and a modification also. Only one of the amendments has significant change, but staff has advised that this is the best way to handle making the whole change, and so that's that's why we move forward that way. I'm going to read all the amendments again, and I'll point out the ones that are new.
Okay, excellent. Senator may proceed.
Okay, so Amendment 1 makes technical changes to the bill. Amendment 2 defines certain terms and specifies that the Maryland Trauma Physicians Fund consists of registration surcharge, 10% of fines collected for DUIs and impaired driving. That all is old. The new part is that it adds trauma health care practitioners, which includes nurses and physical therapists, to receive on-call compensations from the fund. The amendment also increases the reimbursement rates for those individuals and physicians from 30% to 60% in the level 2 trauma centers, and from 35 to 60% in the level 3 trauma centers. It also gives authority to the commission to, and this is again not new. It also gives authority to the commission to change the percentage under certain circumstances. The amendment also adds additional items for the commission to include in its annual report to the General Assembly and requires the commission to award a grant up to, and this is just a slight adjustment in the language, of $900,000 from the fund to both the level 1 pediatric trauma centers. Amendment 3 increases the fine for first and second offense for a person convicted of a violation of drunk and impaired driving by 10%. Amendment 4 requires an annual appropriation beginning in FY26 of at least $16.5 million to the Amos Fund, Fire Rescue, and an ambulance fund. So the gist of this is, in the first part where I was talking about all those percentages, so the Physicians Fund has to maintain a certain amount of a percentage of money in it, and it was holding a higher amount than was necessary to be held from our standards here, but the reason it was is because of the access to the money through Medicaid. What we've done here is set up the system so it will allow more of the money that is in the fund to be accessible to the various trauma centers. So if you look at what was there, it's about $7 million, and that was kind of locked up in the fund. We're going to get the vast majority out of that so it can actually be put to use. And so that's primarily what that does. All the other amendments are the same, but that's the big change in what we are accomplishing.
All right. The chair has moved the substitute committee amendments. The Senator from the 35th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. If the floor leader would yield for just one question.
It appears so. Senator may proceed.
Certainly.
Thank you. So with the proposed amendments, and you talked about different fund, is MSOF still included in that fund?
I'm sorry.
Is MSOF, is that still funded
yeah.
with this?
Oh yeah, everything is the same. The funding levels that we put in the original bill are the same. This is really just allowing for the money that goes into that physician funds. More of it on a daily basis is going to be able to be used, and we're going to be using it not only for physicians but nurses and other hospital staff and individuals who can access that money. These are the all on-call people, and what we're basically doing is making it easier for all of the hospitals, all the trauma centers, to access the money to ensure that they have the right personnel there when they need them.
Thank you.
All right. The question before the body remains on the substitute committee amendments. Any further discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the substitute committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 1092 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. All right, let's go back to judicial proceedings. This is Report 22. Clerk, read the first bill.
Senate Bill 100, Senator Watson, Criminal Law Organized Retail Theft, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the chair of the committee as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, this bill establishes the offense of organized retail theft of property with an aggregated value exceeding $1,500. A violation of this prohibition is a felony punishable by imprisonment up to 5 years or a $5,000 maximum fine. A person who violates this prohibition must restore the property to the owner, and if unable to restore the property to the owner, must pay the owner the full value of the property. A conviction for organized retail theft merges into a conviction under the general theft statute for the purposes of sentencing where 2 convictions arise from the same acts or transactions. The bill also clarifies the venue for prosecution of the case involving multiple thefts in multiple counties committed by the same person under one scheme or continuing course of conduct. Mr. President, there are 2 committee amendments. Amendment number 1 is technical, and amendment number 2 establishes a process for the court to make a finding of whether the specific crimes are organized retail theft. Mr. President, I'd move for the adoption of the favorable 2 committee amendments and favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the favorable report is amended. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 100 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 139, Senator Watson, driver's license suspension for child support arrears, exception, favorable with 2 amendments.
Senator 26th District is the floor leader.
Long day. Thank you, Mr. President. This bill generally exempts an obligor whose individual income for the current year is at or below 250% of the federal poverty guidelines from provisions requiring the Motor Vehicle Administration to suspend the obligor's license or privilege to drive in the state if he or she is out of compliance with a child support order and specified conditions. Now, this exemption does not apply if the obligor has been judicially determined to be voluntarily impoverished under state law. This bill also extends from 60 to 90 days the period during which the holder of a non-commercial license may be out of compliance with the child support order before the Child Support Administration notifies MVA. The first amendment, 2 amendments. First is technical. Amendment number 2 removes provisions extending from 60 to 120 days the period during which the holder of a non-commercial license may be out of compliance with the child support order before CSA notifies MVA and places other provisions of the bill into a new subsection so as to not conflict with SB 174, which passed 2nd reader on March 16th. I want to move the bill and the 2 amendments.
All right.
Favorable.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 139 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 551, Senator Sidnor, Criminal Procedure Committed Persons Release Proceedings, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsors, the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, this bill makes various changes to procedures related to the release of a person committed to the Maryland Department of Health after being found not criminally responsible. The bill establishes that the Maryland rules governing discovery in civil matters in circuit court apply to a proceeding to determine eligibility for conditional release or discharge. It requires the court and MDH to promptly inform the committed person's counsel of record when they receive a report that the committed person violated a condition of release or violated conditional release respectively. It requires a court on request of any party to hold a hearing after any application is made for a change in the conditional release of the committed person to determine whether the applicant has satisfied the requirements for release, and it establishes the preponderance of the evidence standard applies to an applicant in change of conditional release proceedings. There were 2 amendments. One's technical. The second provides for an application of civil rules for discovery as specified. I move the committee amendments as well as the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended committee report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 551 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. All right, clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 740, Senator Guile, operating a vessel while under the influence of alcohol enforcement and Nix law, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the Vice Chair of the Committee as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, this bill authorizes a court to prohibit a person convicted of operating a vessel while under the influence of alcohol from operating a vessel on the waters of the state for up to 2 years or 5 years if the person causes a death. The bill requires DNR to establish and maintain a database of persons prohibited from operating a vessel on the waters and establishes criminal penalties for persons who operate a vessel while prohibited. There are 2 committee amendments. Amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 establishes criminal penalties for operating a vessel while prohibited. Mr. President, I move the 2 committee amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
All right, floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objection? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 740 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 943, Senator Kelly, Vehicle Laws, Bus Obstruction Monitoring Systems, Better Bus Service Act of 2024, favorable with 3 amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsors, the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, this is an enabling legislation that establishes a statewide authorization for local jurisdictions to use bus obstruction monitoring systems to enforce the prohibition against driving a motor vehicle in a dedicated bus lane. The current statutory provisions governing the bus lane monitoring systems in Baltimore City are renamed and expanded to incorporate all local jurisdictions in the state, and in addition, the bill establishes the work group on curb space management. There are 3 amendments. The first is technical, the second is technical, and the third creates an exception to the prohibition on vehicle driving in dedicated bus lanes for vehicles making brief stops for the sole purpose of dropping off or picking up passengers. The amendments and the the amendments in the bill passed unanimously, so I move for the adoption of the amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 3 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 3 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is amended, is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 943 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. All right, we've got a Committee of Finance. Report number 33. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 816, Senator Hester, Economic Development, Cyber Maryland Fund and Program Alterations, favorable with 2 amendments.
All right. Recognizing the senator from the 40th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 816 alters requirements related to the Cyber Maryland Program and Fund by requiring TEDCO rather than the Cyber Maryland Program to administer the Cyber Maryland Fund, clarifying the types of administrative expenses that may be paid for from the fund, including hiring staff, consultants, and other necessary professionals, removing the requirement to hire specified staff for the program, and removing the mandate to provide funding for the specific staff. TEDCO is also required to adopt regulations to award grants under the program. Amendment number 1 alters the purpose paragraph. Amendment number 2 requires the governor to include $250,000 in the annual budget each year for talent pipeline management. There was no opposition at the committee hearing. I move the amendments and adoption of the favorable committee report.
All right, the floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 816 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 855, Washington County Senators, Washington County Board of License Commissioners, and Board of Community College Trustees, membership favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the senator from Carroll County's floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 855, as amended, alters, it's a Washington County bill. In Washington County, the composition of the Board of License Commissioners. Under the bill, membership on the board must be based on the results of the preceding election of Washington County's Board of Commissioners. Specifically, 2 members must belong to the political party that received the highest aggregated number of votes, and 1 member must belong to the political party that received the second highest aggregated number of votes. Amendment number 1 makes changes to the title of the bill. Amendment number 2 strikes from the bill provisions that would establish similar membership criteria for the Board of Community College Trustees. I would move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objection? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objection? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 855 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 944, Senator Kelly, non-prescription drugs and devices provision by registered nurses and sale of contraceptives through automatic devices, favorable with 3 amendments.
Recognizing the senator from the 33rd is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, Senate Bill 944 repeals a prohibition under the criminal law article against selling or offering for sale a non-latex condom by means of a vending machine or other automatic device, while establishing a prohibition against the sale of a natural membrane condom under the Health General article. It also requires a certain formulary used by registered nurses to include additional information on non-prescription contraceptive drugs and devices approved for over-the-counter use, and authorizes a registered nurse to provide non-prescription drugs and devices without a prescription in compliance with current law. The bill also makes other conforming changes. Amendment 1 makes changes to the purpose and function paragraphs. Amendment 2 strikes provisions that would have repealed a prohibition on selling a contraceptive or contraceptive device by means of a vending machine at specific school sites. Amendment 3 prohibits a person from selling or offering a natural membrane condom as described. There is no fiscal impact. It passed the committee unanimously. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 3 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 3 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 944 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. All right, we're going to do one more report today in this session, and then we'll see what time it is and make a decision then. Let's go to report number 32 out of Finance. And the clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 9, Senator Watson, Prince George's County Alcoholic Beverages Licensed Nonprofit Organizations, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the senator from the 22nd District is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill is a local bill that authorizes the Prince George's County Board of License Commissioners to issue a Class C fraternal sorority service organization beer, wine, and liquor license for use by an independent and nonprofit nationwide fraternal or sorority organizations. The 2 amendments here are technical and define the sorority and fraternal organization. The bill is also amended and is supported by the delegation. I move the committee amendments and ask to accept the report.
All right, the floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 9 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 537, Senator Feldman, Cannabis Licensee Locations Restrictions, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the chair of the committee is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 637 prohibits the adoption of a local ordinance establishing zoning requirements for licensed dispensaries that are more restrictive than zoning requirements for a licensed retail alcohol beverage dealer, and licensed growers cultivating cannabis outdoors that are more restrictive than any zoning requirements that existed on June 30, 2023, governing a hemp farm. The bill also clarifies an existing provision regarding the location of licensed dispensaries. Amendment 1 modifies zoning exclusions for cannabis licenses that were operating prior to the legal sale of adult use cannabis, which were included in Senate Bill 158, and further clarifies the exclusions for outdoor cultivation by specifying that the area must be zoned for agricultural use. Amendment 2 authorizes localities to increase the distance between dispensaries to 2,000 feet. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Oh, yep, chair recognizes the minority leader on the committee amendments.
Motion, bill, and amendments lie over under the rule.
The motion is in order. The bill and the amendments will lie over under the rule. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 795, Senator Guile, Health Occupations Practice Audiology Definition, favorable 1 amendment.
Recognizing the senator from the 33rd District as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, Senate Bill 795 alters the definition of practice of audiology, specifying activities that are included and not included in the definition. Practice of audiology means to evaluate, diagnose, and treat auditory or vestibular conditions in the ear, and to prescribe, order, sell, dispense, or fit certain assistive devices. It includes specified testing, screening, imaging, and removal activities. Generally, practice of audiology does not include surgery or the preparation, operation, or performance of radiographic imaging. Amendment 1 narrows the definition of practice of audiology by striking language authorizing the use of any means known in the science of audiology, limits the removal of a foreign body or cerumen from the ear canal to instances not requiring anesthesia, and limits certain testing and imaging to instances related to the auditory or vestibular condition of the ear. There is no fiscal impact. I move the amendment and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objection? Without objection, the favorable report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 795 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 975, Senator Alford, Public Safety, Reproductive Health Care, Security Grant Program Establishment Supporting Reproductive Health Care Clinics Act, favorable with 3 amendments.
Recognizing the senator from Anne Arundel as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 975 establishes the Reproductive Health Care Clinic Security Grant Program in the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention and Policy. The program will provide grants to assist reproductive health care clinics in the state with costs associated with security improvements. Improvements may include perimeter lighting, fencing, door locks, cameras, and alarms. For fiscal 2026, the governor may include $500,000 in the budget for the program. Amendment 1 is technical. Amendment 2 clarifies that a reproductive health care clinic is a clinic that provides legally protected health care in the state. Amendment 3 moves the program to the Maryland Department of Health. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 3 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections?
Excuse me.
Yes, Chair. Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm so new here. Do I lay it over to look at the amendments?
That's probably the easiest. All right, Senator's motion is in order. The bill and the amendments will lie over under the rule. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 1009, Senator Feldman, Task Force and Responsible Use of Natural Psychedelic Substances, favorable with 1 amendment.
Recognizing Chair of the committee as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. My seatmate and friend is keeping me busy today. Senate Bill 1009 establishes the Task Force on Responsible Use of Natural Psychedelic Substances for the purpose of making recommendations regarding any changes to state law, policy, and practices needed to create a Maryland natural psychedelic substance access program and making recommendations to transition from criminalizing conduct involving natural psychedelic substances. We heard testimony about how this helps with people that are dealing with severe depression and post-traumatic stress. And so this is just a task force to study it. We're not allowing it at this point. The amendment makes technical changes, authorizes the task force to determine additional natural psychedelic substances that can be studied, alters the membership of the task force, and alters the duties of the task force. I move the amendment and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 1 committee amendment, the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 1 committee amendment is adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 1009 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 1056, Senator Kramer, Cigarettes, Other Tobacco Products, and Electronic Smoking Devices Revisions Tobacco Retail Modernization Act of 2024, favorable with 3 amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsors, the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, Senate Bill 1056 is intended to move the state forward in our efforts to keep tobacco products out of the hands of minors. It makes consistent changes to the various laws that regulate the retail sale of tobacco products to individuals under the age of 21, limits the sale of electronic smoking devices to licensed vape shops. In addition, licensed pharmacies will be prohibited from selling tobacco products. Each seller of tobacco products must display their products behind the counter. There are age verification procedures that apply to all retailers and requires at least 1 inspection of licensed tobacco retailers each year. Licensing fees for cigarette and electronic smoking devices are also increased. Amendment 1 is technical. Amendment 2 is clarifying. specifies that the increased fee revenues go to the health department or its designee for inspections, adds additional inspections if there's a violation, exempts sellers of premium cigars from display requirements, and makes conforming changes to provisions of the Health General article that authorize local health department enforcement of illegal sales of tobacco products. Amendment 3 is technical. Mr. President, I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor Leader moves for the adoption of the 3 committee amendments in the favorable committee report. On the amendments, Chair recognizes the Minority Leader.
Mr. President, motion that the bill and the amendments lie over under the rule.
All right, the senator's motion is in order. The bill and the amendments will lie over under the rule. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 1059, Senator Ellis, Maternal Health Assessments, Referrals, Reporting, Maryland Maternal Health Act of 2024. Favorable, 2 amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsor is the floor leader.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. This bill hopes to correct some of the disparities with our expectant moms going to hospitals and coming out with negative results. So this bill requires a provider who receives reimbursement from Medicaid for obstetric services to complete a prenatal risk assessment form for a patient, the birthing facility where an infant is born to complete a postpartum infant and maternal referral form, and the Secretary of Health to develop a Maryland report card for birthing facilities, maternity care for each birthing facility in the state. There are 2 amendments to this bill. Amendment 1 is technical. Amendment 2 strikes language that would have prohibited Medicaid reimbursement. It alters the time frame in which a birthing center or hospital is to call a birthing parent after discharge following a high-risk pregnancy. Also clarifies the type of data to be included in the report card. Also requires a review of the report card at least once every 3 years. It strikes a certain study and instead requires each hospital and freestanding birthing center to participate in the severe maternity morbidity surveillance and review program, and delays implementation of this bill until July 1 of 2025. Therefore, I move the amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor Leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments in the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 1059 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. All right, the desk is not clear, but we're going to pause. We're a bit later than expected. Can we ring the bells, please? We're gonna take a vote here, an informal vote. We can make a choice. We were almost definitely going to not come in tomorrow, but we're gonna see if it's worth it. So the question is, do we come back later today for an afternoon session, or come back tomorrow for a session? Whoop. So a green vote is for the afternoon today. A red vote is for Saturday, tomorrow. All right? Any discussion? The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President.
Has everyone recorded their vote?
Mr. President?
Yes.
I'd like to explain my vote.
2
So I'm going to be spending a lot of time tomorrow. I'm going to need a lot of time looking over legislative bond initiatives. So I'm going to need a lot of time at my house. So I urge everyone to please vote green.
Thank you for that explanation. All right, clerk will take the call. It appears. All right, well, looks like we're back this afternoon. We're going to have a lot, so just mentally prepare. We got to get through all of it as much as we got there. So, all right, let's look at, let's say 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock. So as committees think about what they need to do in between. Check with the chair of finance.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'd like to vote, Finance Committee, we'd like to vote at 4:15.
4:15. 4:15 for finance.
4:15, thank you.
All right. Chair of Education, Energy, and the Environment, we're coming back at 5.
Okay, Triple E will meet at 3:45 for a voting session. 3:45.
3:45 for Triple E. Budget and tax?
Budget and tax, 440.
4:40, okay. Judicial proceedings.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Judicial Proceedings Committee will meet at 4 o'clock for a voting session.
4
Real
o'clock.
4 o'clock, not JPR 4 o'clock.
Real 4 o'clock. Real 4 o'clock. All right. Any other announcements? Any other announcements? Yes, you recognize the Minority Whip.
Mr. President, we were going to have a Republican caucus meeting of those that can be there at 4:30.
4:30
I know
caucus
that.
meeting.
I know with the voting sessions, it's in and out. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Any additional announcements before we do a quorum call? If not, Madam Clerk,
Mr. President,
has everyone recorded their presence? If so, the clerk will take the call. With 45 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland remains in session. Chair recognizes the majority leader.
Yes, Mr. President. I move the Senate of Maryland stand adjourned until 5 o'clock this afternoon.
5 o'clock, without objection, so
Promptly.
ordered. Yes, and we will secure the chamber, so if anybody wants to leave anything, please don't hesitate. So ordered.